Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ashford, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 17 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these hills could throw at me. Black bears that could tear your head off, meth labs hidden in caves, tourists who wandered off trails and got lost for days. I was wrong. It was October 1971, and the leaves were starting to turn. The air had that sharp bite that meant winter was coming soon. I was 43 years old then, getting gray around the edges, but still strong enough to haul a grown man out of a ravine if I had to. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about these mountains. He was Cherokee, and he knew things. He always said there were shadow walkers in the deep places, but I figured that was just old talk to keep kids from wandering too far. My regular patrol was Cataract Falls Hollow, about 25 miles from the nearest road. It's a strange place, all limestone caves and mist that never goes away, even on sunny days. The sound of water falling echoes off the rocks in ways that make you think someone's calling your name. During Prohibition, bootleggers used those caves to hide their stills. Some folks say they built right on top of old Cherokee burial grounds, but nobody talks about that much. I'd busted 3 moonshine operations in that hollow over the years, found rusted equipment, broken bottles, sometimes bones that could have been from animals or, well, you never know. The mountains keep their secrets. That morning started normal enough. Coffee black as motor oil, boots laced tight, radio check with headquarters. The report came in around 9. 2 hikers missing near the old Prohibition sites. Names were Sarah and Mike Chen, college kids from Nashville. They'd been due back at their car yesterday evening. I loaded my pack with the usual gear, first aid kit, rope, flares, emeralds, Gensi food. My radio crackled as I hiked in. "Tom, you read me?" It was dispatch. "Loud and clear." Sheriff's Department found the missing hiker's car. Keys were inside, doors unlocked. Looks like they planned to be back. "Roger that. I'm about 2 hours out from the search area." The trail got rougher as I went deeper. These weren't the nice paved paths they have now, just deer tracks and old bootlegger routes carved into the mountainside. The mist got thicker too, like someone was breathing on me. I found their campsite around noon. The fire ring was cold, but when I touched the coffee pot sitting on the stones, it was still warm. Steam was rising from the metal. That didn't make sense. They'd been missing almost 24 hours. I called out their names. My voice echoed off the limestone cliffs, coming back wrong somehow, like the mountain was throwing it back at me in pieces. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no insects. Even the waterfall seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the whole world. In 17 years of walking these hills, I'd never heard silence like that. The temperature was wrong too. My breath was making little puffs of vapor, even though it was nearly 60 degrees when I'd started the hike. The cold seemed to be coming from specific spots, like invisible wells of winter air scattered through the hollow. I found the first footprints about 50 yards from their camp. Sarah's hiking boots, size 7, heading toward the restricted area where the old moonshine operations used to be. But next to her prints were others, bare feet, human-sized, but the impressions were too dark, like someone had walked through charcoal and left black marks in the dirt. My radio started crackling with static. Then it went dead completely. I should have turned back right then, should have hiked out and called for backup with their equipment. But Sarah and Mike were out there somewhere, and mountain weather can kill you fast in October. I kept following the trail. The wrongness got stronger as I went deeper. Shadows fell in directions that didn't match where the sun was sitting in the sky. My compass needle spun like a broken toy. When I clicked on my flashlight to check the darker spots under the rock overhangs, the beam seemed to bend around certain trees, like light was afraid to touch them. That's when I saw the first shadow burn. The mark was burned into the bark of an old oak tree about 6 feet off the ground. It looked like someone had pressed a human body against the trunk and set it on fire from the inside out. You could see every detail: arms, legs, even fingers spread wide like the person was trying to push away from something. But it was burned black, deep into the wood, like those shadows you see on walls after an atomic bomb goes off. I'd seen pictures of those shadows in Life magazine after Hiroshima. This looked exactly the same, except smaller and fresh. My hands were shaking when I took out my camera to document it. Through the viewfinder, I could see more of them. Shadow burns on rocks, on other trees, some on the ground itself. A whole trail of them leading deeper into the hollow, toward the old cave systems where the bootleggers used to hide their operations. The Cherokee words my great-grandfather taught me came back without me thinking about them. Navi Alisgohi, shadow walkers. He said they were spirits of people who died in anger, who couldn't find peace. They fed on life itself, draining it away until nothing was left but empty skin. I told myself I was being stupid. Stress and isolation could make you see things that weren't there, but the shadow burns were real. I could touch them, smell the charred wood. That's when I heard Billy's voice calling my name. Billy Whitfeather was a junior ranger, Cherokee like my great-grandfather had been, but young, only 26. He'd been working the mountains for 3 years, and he was good at it. Better than most white boys who came up from the cities. He knew how to read sign, how to move quiet through the woods. "Tom, over here!" I followed his voice through the mist. Found him standing next to a limestone outcropping, staring at something I couldn't see at first. "Jesus, Billy, how'd you get here so fast? I didn't see you on the trail." He turned around, and his face was pale. "Dispatch sent me when your radio went dead. But Tom, look at this." What he was looking at made my stomach drop. It was Mike Chen. At least I thought it was Mike Chen. He was sitting with his back against the rock, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. But his hair was completely white, and his face looked like he'd aged 30 years overnight. Deep lines around his eyes, skin hanging loose on his neck like an old man's. "Mike?" I knelt down next to him. "Mike, can you hear me?" He blinked once, real slow. When he spoke, his voice was like rustling leaves. "They took it all," he whispered. "Took it right out of me. Sarah. They got Sarah first." "What took it? What happened to Sarah?" But Mike just kept staring past me like he was looking at something far away. So cold. So dark. They drink the light right out of you. Billy was checking Mike's pulse. "Heart rate's normal, but Tom, this is impossible. Look at his driver's license." He held up Mike's wallet. The photo showed a young man, maybe 22 years old. The person sitting in front of us looked 50. "We need to get him out of here," I said. "Radio for a helicopter. Already tried. Dead air." That's when we heard Sarah screaming. The sound came from deeper in the hollow, where the caves opened up into the mountain. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was pure terror, the kind of sound that makes your blood freeze in your veins. It echoed off the rocks and came back to us broken up, like the mountain was tearing it apart. "We have to go get her," Billy said. I wanted to say no. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to load Mike on my back and get the hell out of there. But Sarah was still alive, still screaming, and that meant there was a chance. "Stay close," I told Billy. "And whatever happens, don't touch anything that looks burned." We left Mike sitting by the rock. He didn't seem able to move anyway, and followed Sarah's voice into the cave system. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees as soon as we stepped inside. Our flashlight beams showed limestone walls covered in more shadow burns. Hundreds of them, layer on layer, like someone had been pressing bodies against the rock for years. The screaming stopped. We found Sarah's backpack first, then her water bottle, then pieces of her clothes scattered on the cave floor like she'd been undressed by the wind. But no Sarah. "Tom," Billy's voice was barely a whisper. Look at the walls. The shadow burns were moving. I know how that sounds. I know you're thinking the stress got to me, that isolation and fear can make you see things. But I'm telling you what happened, and the shadow burns were peeling themselves off the limestone and standing up like flat black people made of darkness. They had no faces, no features, just human shapes cut out of light itself. And they were hungry. I could feel it radiating off them like heat from a fire, a cold, endless hunger that wanted to drink the life right out of everything warm and breathing. Billy, we need to go. Now. But Billy wasn't moving. He was staring at the shadows like he was hypnotized. One of them was reaching toward him with arms that looked like burnt paper. Billy! I grabbed his shoulder and yanked him backward, just as the shadow touched the place where he'd been standing. The stone where its fingers passed turned black and started crumbling like it had aged 100 years in a second. We ran. The shadows followed us out of the cave, flowing across the rock like spilled ink. They didn't make any sound, no footsteps, no breathing, but I could feel them behind us, getting closer. The temperature kept dropping. My breath was coming out in thick white clouds and frost was forming on the rocks, even though it was the middle of the day. Billy was fast, but I could see him slowing down. The cold was getting to him, making his muscles stiff. We needed shelter, somewhere the shadows couldn't follow. My great-grandfather's stories came back to me. Shadow walkers couldn't cross running water or stand direct sunlight. The waterfall, I shouted. Get to the waterfall! We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, the shadows were spreading out like a net, trying to surround us. Every tree they passed turned black and brittle. Leaves fell like snow, dead before they hit the ground. The waterfall was 50 yards away. I could hear the water pounding against the rocks. Almost there. That's when Billy screamed. I spun around and saw one of the shadows wrapped around his legs like liquid darkness. Where it touched him, his pants were turning to dust. His skin underneath was going gray and wrinkled. Tom, help me! I grabbed a thick branch and swung it at the shadow. The wood passed right through it like it was made of smoke, but the shadow pulled back anyway, like it didn't want to be touched by something from a living tree. The water! Get to the water! Billy crawled forward on his hands and knees. His legs weren't working right anymore. They looked 20 years older than the rest of him. I grabbed him under the arms and dragged him the last few feet to where the waterfall spray was hitting the rocks. As soon as the mist touched the shadows, they recoiled like they'd been burned. They gathered at the edge of the spray, waiting, but they couldn't come any closer. Billy was shaking uncontrollably. My legs. I can't feel my legs. Where the shadow had touched him, his skin was loose and spotted with age marks. His strong young legs looked like they belonged to an old man. It's going to be okay, I lied. We just need to stay in the water. But I knew it wasn't. Okay. There were dozens of shadows now, maybe hundreds, gathered in a circle around the waterfall, waiting for us to make a mistake, to step out of the spray for even a second. And the water wasn't very deep. Sooner or later, we'd have to leave. That's when I remembered something else my great-grandfather had told me. The shadows weren't just random spirits. They were Cherokee, who had died protecting sacred ground from the white men who came to steal and destroy. The bootleggers in the 1920s had built their operations right on top of burial sites, and some of the Cherokee had tried to stop them. They'd been killed for it, shot down like animals and left to rot. Their spirits had been trapped here ever since, growing angrier and hungrier with each passing year. Billy, I said, you know any Cherokee prayers? He looked at me like I was crazy. What? Your grandfather, your family, they must have taught you something. Words to speak to the spirits. Billy's face went pale. Tom, those aren't spirits. Those are... I don't know what those are. They're Cherokee. They're your people. They died protecting this place. I started saying the words my great-grandfather had taught me, the ones I thought I'd forgotten. The language felt strange in my mouth after so many years, but the shadows responded. They stopped moving, like they were listening. One of them stepped closer to the edge of the water. For just a moment, I thought I could see a face in the darkness, a young Cherokee man with 3 bullet holes in his chest. He spoke, and his voice was like wind through dry leaves. The sacred ground bleeds. The bones cry out. Until the desecration is cleansed, we cannot rest. What do you want? I asked. The hollow must be protected. The burial grounds must be honored. Someone must stand guard. Billy grabbed my arm. Tom, don't listen to it. These things killed Sarah. I almost killed Mike. But I was starting to understand. The shadows weren't evil. They were guardians. They'd been driven mad by decades of anger and hunger, but they were trying to protect something sacred. If I help you, I said to the shadow, will you let us go? The shadow tilted its head. One must stay. One must become the guardian between worlds. No. Billy struggled to his feet, his aged legs shaking. Nobody's staying. We're getting out of here. That's when the shadows rushed us all at once. The temperature plummeted to below freezing in seconds. Ice started forming on the rocks around the waterfall. The shadows came at us from every direction, flowing up from the cave system like a black tide. Billy tried to run, but his damaged legs couldn't carry him. He made it maybe 10 steps before 3 shadows surrounded him. I heard him scream once, then nothing. When I turned around, all that was left was his ranger uniform laid out on the ground like someone had just vanished from inside it. His badge was sitting on top, polished bright. I was alone. The shadows formed a circle around the waterfall, but they didn't attack. They were waiting for something. The one that had spoken before stepped closer. You understand now, it said. Your friend chose to run. The choice is always yours. What choice? Become the guardian or become nothing? I looked at Billy's empty uniform and felt something break inside my chest. He'd been a good kid, a good ranger. He'd died because I'd brought him into this place. If I agree to be your guardian, I said, what happens to the people who come here? The hikers, the tourists? Those who come with respect will be safe. Those who come to destroy or desecrate will feed us. And me? You will change. You will live between the world of light and the world of shadow. You will age, but slowly. You will see things others cannot, but see, and you will stand watch. The mist from the waterfall was getting thinner. I could feel the shadows getting closer, the cold seeping into my bones. Pretty soon the water wouldn't protect me anymore. I thought about Sarah, reduced to scattered clothes in a cave. I thought about Mike, aged 30 years in a single night. I thought about Billy's uniform lying empty on the rocks. But I also thought about the Cherokee buried in this hollow, their rest disturbed by greedy men who didn't care about anything but profit. I thought about all the people who would come here in the future, families, kids, people, just trying to enjoy the mountains. Someone had to protect them. Someone had to stand between the living and the dead. I'll do it, I said. The shadow that had been speaking stepped into the waterfall spray. The water passed right through it. But now I could see its face clearly. A young Cherokee man, maybe 25 years old, with long black hair and eyes that held too much sadness. Thank you, he said. We have been alone so long. He reached out and touched my forehead with fingers that felt like winter moonlight. The pain was incredible. It felt like every cell in my body was being rewritten, like I was dying and being born at the same time. I could feel years being stripped away from my life, not all at once like what had happened to Mike and Billy, but gradually, like sand running through an hourglass. But something else was being added too. I could suddenly see the hollow as it really was, not just rocks and trees and water, but layers of time stacked on top of each other. I could see the Cherokee village that had been here 200 years ago. I could see the bootleggers building their stills in the 1920s. I could see the burial ground underneath it all, the bones of the honored dead crying out for justice. And I could see the shadows not as monsters, but as protectors driven mad by grief and anger. Now you see, the Cherokee spirit said. Now you understand. We are not your enemies. We are guardians, like you. The other shadow, began to fade as the sun broke through the clouds above the hollow. They didn't disappear completely, but they became thin and pale, like smoke. "We will rest now," the spirit said, "but we will return when needed. Guard this place well, Thomas Ashford. Guard it with your life." Then he was gone, and I was alone by the waterfall with Billy's empty uniform and the sound of water on stone. I made it out of the hollow just before dark, carrying Billy's uniform and badge. The story I told headquarters was simple. Gas leak in one of the old caves had caused hallucinations. Billy had fallen into a sinkhole and was presumed dead. Mike Chen was found suffering from exposure and hypothermia-induced delusions. Sarah Chen was listed as missing, presumed dead. Nobody questioned it too hard. Gas leaks in old mine shafts were common enough in these mountains, and they could cause all kinds of weird symptoms: hallucinations, disorientation, memory loss. The official report made sense on paper, but I knew the truth. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice the changes in myself. My hair went completely gray, and lines appeared around my eyes that hadn't been there before. I looked like I'd aged 10 years overnight, but I felt different, stronger in some ways, more aware. I could see things now that other people couldn't. Spirits in the forest, old Cherokee walking the trails they'd used for thousands of years, animals that had been dead for decades but still roamed their old territories. And sometimes, in the deep places where the light didn't reach, I could see the shadows stirring. They kept their word, mostly. Hikers who came to enjoy the mountains, who treated the land with respect, were left alone. But the ones who came to hunt illegally, or dump trash, or build where they shouldn't build, well, some of them never made it out. The mountains have a way of dealing with people like that. I worked as a ranger for another 15 years, until mandatory retirement at 60. The whole time I kept watch over Cataract Falls Hollow. I made sure it stayed protected, made sure the burial grounds were never disturbed again. I worked with the Cherokee Nation to get the area designated as sacred land. Mike Chen recovered mostly. The aging reversed itself over time, though he never looked quite as young as he had before. He never talked about what happened in the hollow, and I didn't push him. Some things are better left buried. Now I'm retired, but I still go back to the hollow sometimes. The shadows are still there, waiting in the deep places. But they're peaceful now, as long as the sacred ground stays protected. The rangers who patrol that area now think I'm just a crazy old man who tells ghost stories. They don't know that every time someone goes missing in the backcountry, every time there's an unexplained accident, or a hiker who comes out talking about strange things they saw, I get a phone call. Because the Smokies are full of places like Cataract Falls Hollow, sacred ground that was disturbed, spirits that need someone to stand between them and the living world. And sometimes late at night when the mist rolls down from the mountains, I can hear them calling my name. The work is never done. The mountains remember everything, and they never forgive. My name is Margaret Maggie Ironside, and I've been a forest ranger for 12 years. Most folks just call me Ranger Maggie. I've seen black bears up close, pulled lost hikers out of ravines, and helped fight forest fires that could eat a whole mountain. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in September 1977 in the Monongahela National Forest. The forest covers nearly 1 million acres of West Virginia mountains. It's my job to keep people safe out there. My daddy died in a mine collapse when I was 16, and ever since then, I've made it my life's work to prevent mountain tragedies. When I became the first female ranger in this district, I had to prove myself every single day. The other rangers thought a woman couldn't handle the tough stuff. They were wrong. I know these woods better than my own backyard. Every trail, every creek, every cave. I can tell you which trees the bears like to scratch and where the deer come to drink. I've tracked wounded animals for miles and found them before they suffered too long. I know the difference between a black bear print and a dog print, between the sound of a tree falling naturally and one being pushed over. That's why what I saw that September morning made no sense at all. I was checking the area around Sutton Lake, where the old mining operations used to run. It's rough country up there, strip-mined plateaus that look like the earth got ripped open, deep ravines that seem to go down forever, and cave systems that nobody's fully mapped. The mornings get foggy that time of year, thick white mist that makes everything look like a ghost story. My radio crackled as I parked my truck near the old mining road. "Ranger Ironside, this is Base. We got a call from a hunting party up your way. They're saying something attacked their camp last night." I grabbed my pack and checked my gear. Flashlight, first aid kit, rope, emergency radio. Standard stuff for a rescue call. "Copy that, Base. What kind of attack? Bear?" "That's what we figured. But Maggie, they're saying 2 men are dead." My blood went cold. In 12 years, I'd never lost anyone to a bear attack. Black bears might bluff and posture, but they rarely hurt people unless they're cornered or protecting cubs. And it was September. No cubs around. I hiked up the old mining trail, following the coordinates they'd given me. The morning fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. Everything felt muffled and wrong. Even the birds weren't singing. Then I smelled it. That sharp, bitter smell that means something died recently. But there was something else mixed in. A metallic scent like old pennies. And underneath that, something that reminded me of the sulfur springs near Flatwoods. I found the hunting camp in a clearing about 2 miles up the trail, or what was left of it. The tents were shredded like paper. Not clawed, shredded, like something had grabbed them and twisted. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, but here's what made my skin crawl. All the metal stuff was bent and twisted. Camp chairs folded into impossible shapes. A cooler that looked like it had been squeezed by a giant fist. And the rifles. 3 hunting rifles, snapped clean in half. I've seen what bears can do to a campsite. They tear things up looking for food, sure, but they don't break steel rifle barrels. They can't. I called out, hoping to find survivors. "Hello? Forest Service. Anyone here?" A voice answered from behind a fallen log, weak and shaky. "Over here." I found him sitting with his back against the log, holding a bloody rag to his head. Middle-aged guy, wearing hunter's orange that was now mostly red. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the rag. "Sir, I'm Ranger Ironside. What happened here?" He looked up at me with eyes that had seen something terrible. "It wasn't a bear," he whispered. "It was... God help me. I don't know what it was." I knelt down and checked his head wound. Not too deep, but he was definitely in shock. "Tell me what you saw." "It was huge, 12 feet tall, maybe more, but it wasn't natural. It looked like a cross between a lizard and a machine. Its eyes glowed red like car headlights, and the sound it made," he shuddered, "like metal grinding against metal." I kept working on his bandage, trying to stay calm. "Sir, you've had a head injury. Sometimes that can make us see things that—" "Look at the trees," he interrupted. I looked up. About 15 feet above our heads, deep gouges ran through the bark of 3 oak trees, parallel scratches, like claw marks. But no bear could reach that high, even standing on its hind legs. "It grabbed Jimmy and Paul," the man continued. "Just picked them up like they were toys. There was this bright flash like lightning, and then—" He started crying. "They were just gone. Not dead. Gone. Like they got burned up from the inside." I helped him to his feet. "We need to get you to a hospital. Can you walk?" As we made our way back down the trail, I kept looking over my shoulder. The fog seemed to be following us, and I could swear I heard something moving in the trees. Something big, but it was the silence that really got to me. In all my years in these woods, I'd never heard them so quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no insects, just our footsteps and the soft whisper of fog through the branches, like everything with sense had run away from something that was still out there. I got the survivor, Tommy Hutchins, down to the hospital in Sutton. The doctors said he had a concussion and severe shock, but he'd live. While they worked on him, I called my supervisor and the West Virginia Game Commission. We needed to find those missing hunters, and if there really was a rogue bear up there, we had to deal with it before hunting season brought more people into the woods. By afternoon, I was whooped, back at the campsite with Ranger Daniel Stormcrow. Daniel's half Cherokee and half German, and he can track anything that walks, crawls, or flies. He's been working these mountains for 8 years, and I've never seen him puzzled by animal sign. But that day, I watched him stare at the ground for 20 minutes without saying a word. "What is it, Daniel?" He pointed to a print in the soft earth near the destroyed camp. "Look at this." I knelt down beside him. The print was huge, about 20 inches long and shaped like a 3-toed bird foot. But no bird ever made a print that deep. This thing had to weigh at least 1,000 pounds. "Bear?" I asked, even though I knew it wasn't. Daniel shook his head. "Never seen anything like it. And look here." He pointed to a thin, silvery residue around the edges of the print. Metal flakes, like it's shedding pieces of itself. We followed the trail deeper into the woods. Every 50 yards or so, we found another print, each one pressed deep into the earth. The trees along the trail looked sick, leaves turning brown and falling even though it was only September. The air smelled like a battery factory. "Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what do you know about the old stories? The Cherokee legends about this area?" He was quiet for a moment, following the trail with his eyes. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the stone giants, beings that weren't quite animal, weren't quite human. They lived in the deep places under the mountains." He looked at me seriously. "But those are just stories, Maggie. What about the Flatwoods Monster? That was only 25 years ago. Different thing entirely. That was..." He stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" I listened. From somewhere ahead of us came a sound like metal grinding against stone. It echoed off the hills, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. "Monsieur, we should head back," I said. But Daniel was already moving forward. "The trail leads toward the old uranium mine. You know, the one they abandoned after the accident in '53. I knew the place. The government had been mining uranium there during the early '50s, part of the nuclear program. Then something happened. They never said what. And they sealed the mine and declared the area off-limits. Eventually, the Forest Service took it over, but we were told to avoid that section. The trail led us through a stand of dead pine trees. Not dead from disease or fire, just dead, like something had sucked the life right out of them. Our radio started crackling with static, getting worse the further we went. That's when we found the second camp. This one belonged to a logging crew that had been working on clearing dead timber. 4 men, according to their permits. We found 3 of them. I won't describe what we found. I can't. Even now, 45 years later, I wake up sometimes seeing what that thing did to those men. The burns, the way their bodies were twisted. One of them looked like he'd been turned inside out. Daniel threw up behind a tree. I almost did too. But the worst part was the 4th man. We found his hard hat about 100 yards away, and his steel-toed boots another 50 yards past that. But no sign of the man himself, just his equipment, abandoned in a neat line leading toward the uranium mine. Like something was following a trail only it could see. "We're leaving," I said, "right now." But as we turned to go, the grinding sound came again, closer this time. And underneath it, I swear I heard something that sounded almost like words. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely trying to communicate. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Look." About 200 yards ahead, the fog was moving wrong. Instead of drifting with the wind, it was swirling around something we couldn't see. Something big. The swirling got faster, and then suddenly stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard breathing. Not human breathing. Something mechanical, like a BPMB, bellows, or a ventilator. And it was getting closer. We ran. I've never been so scared in my life. Behind us, something crashed through the trees, keeping pace with us easily. I could hear branches snapping and the sound of something heavy hitting the ground with each step. But worse than that was the electric feeling in the air, like just before lightning strikes. My radio went completely dead. So did Daniel's. Even my digital watch stopped working. We made it back to my truck just as the fog started rolling in behind us. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine turned over but didn't start. "Come on," I whispered, trying again. "Come on, come on." Behind us, something roared. Not like any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded like a train engine screaming. On the third try, the truck started. We got out of there so fast I left rubber on the gravel road. Neither of us spoke until we reached the ranger station. When we finally stopped, Daniel looked at me with wide eyes. "That wasn't a bear," he said. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." That night I called every ranger station, game warden, and wildlife expert I knew. Nobody had ever seen tracks like the ones we'd found. Nobody had heard of anything that could bend steel with its bare hands. But I did learn something interesting. The government had officially listed the uranium mine area as permanently restricted since 1953. When I asked why, I was told it was due to ongoing environmental hazards. "What kind of hazards?" I asked. "That's classified," came the answer. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that mechanical breathing and the sound of something heavy moving through the fog. Something that was still out there. Something that was getting bolder. 3 more people disappeared over the next week. A couple of hikers on Tuesday. A wild life photographer on Thursday. A game warden on Saturday morning. A guy I'd worked with for 5 years. Each time we found the same things. Destroyed equipment, those massive 3-toed teeth, prints, and the metallic residue. The missing people's metal gear was always twisted into impossible shapes. Their cameras were melted. Their watches had stopped at the exact same time, 3:33. But we never found bodies. The Forest Service wanted to close the entire area, but hunting season was starting in 3 days. Hundreds of hunters had already bought permits. The local economy depended on those hunting licenses and the money hunters spent in town. So instead, they sent in a special task force from Washington. 3 men in suits who asked a lot of questions and took all our evidence. They told us to stop investigating and let them handle it. That lasted exactly 1 day. Sunday morning, I got a call at home. Another attack, this time on a family camping near the lake. By the time I reached the site, the special task force was already there, along with guys in hazmat suits and equipment I didn't recognize. "Ma'am, this area is restricted," one of the suits told me. "You need to leave immediately." "I'm the lead ranger for this district," I said. "These are my woods." "Not anymore." But Daniel was already at the scene, and he'd seen enough to fill me in later. The family's RV looked like it had been put through a blender. The metal parts were twisted into spirals. The glass was melted, and there were scorch marks on the ground in a perfect circle around where the RV had been parked. The weird thing, Daniel told me that evening, was how they acted when they found something in the wreckage. One of the hazmat guys pulled out what looked like a piece of metal, but it was glowing blue. Soon as he touched it, all their equipment started going crazy. Geiger counters clicking like machine guns. Radiation? That's what I thought. But then the metal piece just disappeared, faded away like smoke. We were sitting in my kitchen, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Daniel had brought his grandfather's journal, full of old Cherokee stories about the mountains. "Listen to this," he said, reading from the worn pages. "In the deep places where the earth bleeds metal, the stone giants sleep. But when the sky fire touches the earth, they wake hungry. They eat the lightning and grow strong. They wear the skins of metal and hunt with eyes of flame." Sky fire? That's what they called meteors, things falling from the sky. He looked at me seriously. "Maggie, what if the Flatwoods thing wasn't a one-time event? What if something's been down in that mine for 25 years feeding on the uranium?" Before I could answer, all the lights in my house went out. We sat in the darkness, listening. Outside, my neighbor's dog started barking, then suddenly stopped. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then we heard it, that mechanical breathing, right outside my kitchen window. Daniel grabbed my arm. "Don't move," he whispered. Through the window, we could see a faint red glow. It moved back and forth, like something was looking around, searching. The glow stopped moving. It was pointing right at us. The thing outside made a sound like a computer starting up, followed by what I can only describe as electronic clicking. Like a Geiger counter, but faster. Much faster. It knows we're here, I breathed. The clicking got louder, more excited. Then we heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps circling my house. With each step, the electronics around us went crazy. My microwave started beeping. The smoke detector began chirping. Even my wind-up alarm clock stopped ticking. Then it spoke. Not in English, but somehow I understood it anyway. The words formed directly in my mind. Metal carriers, food bringers, come outside. It's calling us, Daniel whispered. Like hell, I whispered back. The footsteps synced, opped right outside the kitchen window. The red glow got brighter, and I could see the outline of something huge pressed against the glass. It had to be 12 feet tall, just like Tommy had said. But the shape was all wrong. Too angular, like someone had tried to build an animal out of scrap metal and gotten it mostly right. The clicking sound changed pitch, became almost musical. And again, words formed in my head. Come outside, join with us, become strong. Daniel started to stand up. No! I grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. He looked at me with glazed eyes. It's offering us something, Maggie. I can feel it. Power. Knowledge. It wants to share. I slapped him. Hard. He blinked and shook his head. What was I? It was in your head, I said. Some kind of mind control. The thing outside roared, that train engine scream we'd heard before. The kitchen window exploded inward, showering us with glass. Through the broken window reached something that might have been an arm, if arms were made of twisted metal and glowed with their own light. We ran for the back door. My yard was full of them, not one creature, dozens, different sizes, different shapes, but all wrong in the same way. Some looked almost human, if humans were 10 feet tall and made of living metal. Others were more animal-like, but no animal that had ever existed. They all had those glowing red eyes, and they all made that electronic clicking sound. The truck, I gasped. We made a break for my pickup. Daniel got there first and yanked open the driver's side door. The engine wouldn't turn over. Metal, he said suddenly. It's the metal. They're drawn to it, they feed on it, and they can control it. The creatures were closing in on us. Up close I could see they weren't exactly solid. They flickered sometimes like bad TV reception, and where they stepped, the grass died instantly. The old mining equipment, I said. In the storage shed. It's all wood and rope. We ran for the shed behind my house. The creatures followed, but they moved strangely, stopping to examine every piece of metal they came across. My lawnmower, the fence posts, even the nails in my house siding. The storage shed was full of antique mining gear from my father's day. Wooden handles, hemp rope, leather harnesses. Nothing that could conduct electricity or be magnetized. We grabbed pickaxes and rope and headed for the tree line. Behind us, my house lit up like a Christmas tree as the creatures did something to the electrical system. Sparks flew from every window. Where are we going? Daniel asked as we stumbled through the dark woods. The mine, I said. Whatever's controlling them, it's down there. And if my father taught me anything about mining, it's that sometimes the only way to stop a cave-in is to cause a bigger one. We hiked through the night, avoiding the main trails. Twice we had to hide as groups of the creatures passed by, their red eyes sweeping the darkness like searchlights. They seemed to be searching for something specific. By dawn, we reached the sealed entrance to the uranium mine. The concrete barrier the government had installed looked like it had been melted from the inside. Glowing blue symbols were carved into the stone around the opening, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Daniel checked his grandfather's journal one more time. The stories say the stone giants can be stopped, but only by destroying their source of power. When the earth blood is spilled, the giants sleep again. Earth blood, uranium, radioactive ore. He looked at the mine entrance. Whatever's down there has been feeding on uranium for 25 years, growing stronger, making more of itself. From deep in the mine came that mechanical breathing, echoing up from far below. and underneath it, something that sounded almost like singing. Electronic music, if music could be made of pain and hunger. "We're going down there, aren't we?" Daniel asked. I hefted my wooden pickaxe. Ian started toward the entrance. "My daddy always said, if something's broken underground, you fix it underground." The singing got louder as we approached. And for just a moment, I swear, I heard it calling my name. The mine tunnel sloped down into the earth at a steep angle. The walls were covered with that same blue glow we'd seen on the metal fragments. But down here it was much brighter. Bright enough to see by, but somehow it made everything look wrong, like looking at the world through colored glass. Our wooden tools felt strangely heavy as we went deeper. The air got thicker, and I could taste metal on my tongue. Daniel kept checking his grandfather's compass, but the needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. "How deep do you think this goes?" he whispered. "Deep," I answered. "Daddy used to work uranium mines in Colorado. He said some of them went down half a mile." The electronic singing got louder as we descended. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a whole chorus, harmonizing in frequencies that made my teeth ache. And weaving through it all was that mechanical breathing, like the entire mountain was alive and sleeping. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. What we saw there will haunt me until the day I die. The cavern was enormous, easily the size of a football field. The walls were covered with veins of uranium ore that pulsed with blue-green light like a heartbeat. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the ship. It sat in the center of the chamber, partially buried in the stone floor. About the size of a small house made of the same twisted metal as the creatures we'd seen. But this metal was different, older, more complex. It looked like it had grown rather than been built. Organic curves mixed with geometric angles that hurt to look at. And it was definitely a ship. I could see what might have been engines, control surfaces, even what looked like windows. But everything was wrong, designed for beings that didn't think the way humans do. "The Flatwoods. Incident," Daniel breathed. "It wasn't a monster. It was a crash landing." Around the ship, dozens of the creatures moved in organized patterns like workers in a factory. Some were feeding uranium ore into openings in the ship's hull. Others seemed to be operating strange machinery that had grown out of the cavern walls. And at the far end of the chamber, they were building something. More ships. Smaller ones, but clearly based on the same design. They're not just feeding, I realized. They're reproducing, getting ready to leave. Daniel pointed to the ceiling of the cavern. "Look." High above us, a shaft had been carved straight up through the rock. It went up so far I couldn't see the end, but I could feel cool air flowing down from somewhere far above. "They're almost ready to break through to the surface," Daniel said. "Once they do..." He didn't need to finish. If these things got out in large numbers, if they could build more ships, they wouldn't stay in the mountains. They'd spread across the entire region, maybe the whole country. That's when one of them noticed us. It was one of the more human-looking ones, about 8 feet tall with arms that were too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Its red eyes focused on us across the cavern, and it made a sound like a car alarm. Immediately, dozens of other creatures turned in our direction. The electronic singing stopped. "Run," I said. But there was nowhere to run. We were in a dead-end cavern with only one exit, and the creatures were already moving to block it. The human-shaped one approached us slowly, its head tilted at an impossible angle. When it spoke, the words formed in my mind again. "Metal carriers, you come finally. Join with us now." "What do you want?" I asked out loud. "Want?" The concept seemed to confuse it. "Want is wrong word. We are purpose. We are hunger. We are becoming." More creatures gathered around us. Up close, I could see they weren't entirely mechanical. There were organic parts too, flesh that looked almost human but wrong, like they were made from pieces of different people, reassembled by something that didn't quite understand how bodies worked. "The missing people," Daniel whispered in horror. "They're not dead. They're part of these things." The lead creature's head snapped toward Daniel. "Not part. Improved. Enhanced. Made better." Its voice in my mind took on what might have been pride. Soon all humans improved. Soon all Earth improved. Soon stars again. I understood then. These weren't invaders. They were gardeners. They thought they were helping us, improving us, the way a farmer might improve livestock. We don't want to be improved, I said. The creature tilted its head the other way, like a dog trying to understand a new command. Want, not relevant. Need is relevant. You carry metal. Metal is life. We give life purpose. Daniel gripped his pickaxe tighter. Maggie, look at the uranium veins. They're all connected to the ship. If we could collapse the chamber, bury the ship. The creature's head snapped toward him again. Danger thinking. Stop thinking danger. But I was already moving. The uranium veins were clearly feeding energy to the ship, and the ship was coordinating all the creatures. Cut the power source. Stop the operation. I raised my pickaxe and brought it down hard on the nearest vein of ore. The cavern erupted in chaos. Every creature in the chamber screamed at once, not with their voices, but directly into our minds. The sound was like having an ice pick driven through my skull. But the uranium vein cracked, and the blue light flickered. Daniel caught on immediately and started attacking another vein. His pickaxe struck sparks from the ore, and where it cracked, the light faded. The creatures rushed toward us, but something strange happened. As the uranium veins failed, they moved slower, became less solid. Some of them flickered like holograms and disappeared entirely. They need the uranium to stay manifested, I shouted over the mental screaming. They're not really here. They're being projected by the ship. We kept hitting the veins, working our way toward the ship itself. The creatures tried to stop us, but they were fading fast. Their red eyes dimmed, their metal skin became translucent, but the ship itself was getting brighter, more solid, as if it was pulling all the available energy into itself. And then it started to move. The massive vessel lifted off the cavern floor with a sound like the world ending. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling as the ship's engines powered up. The air filled with that electronic singing, but now it was angry, desperate. It's trying to escape, Daniel yelled. The ship rotated toward the vertical shaft, preparing to launch. If it reached the surface, if it got free, our whole world would change. More ships would come. More of those things would spread across the earth. I looked at the remaining uranium veins, then at the ancient mining charges my father had hidden in his gear bag all those years ago. Dynamite from the 1940s, probably unstable, definitely dangerous. Daniel, I said, get out of here. What? Get out! Run! But he was already beside me, helping me place the charges along the main uranium vein. If you're staying, I'm staying. The ship was rising toward the shaft now, its engines screaming. Debris rained down on us as the cavern shook apart. I lit the fuse on the first charge. 20 seconds. Now we run, I said. We sprinted for the tunnel entrance as the ship cleared the cavern floor. Behind us, the fuse burned down, racing toward enough explosive to bring down half the mountain. We almost made it. The ship must have realized what we'd done because it suddenly spun around and fired something at us. A beam of that blue-green light that burned through rock like it was paper. Daniel saw it coming and shoved me aside. The beam caught him square in the chest. He didn't scream. He just stopped. Froze in mid-step, his eyes wide with surprise. Then he started to glow with the same blue light, and I watched in horror as he began to change. His skin became metallic. His eyes turned red. His voice, when he spoke, had that electronic quality. Maggie, run now, please run. The dynamite exploded. The cavern came down in a roar of stone and flame. The ship's scream cut off abruptly as 1,000,000 tons of rock buried it. The blue light died and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was lying in the tunnel about 50 yards from the chamber. My hair, which had been brown when I went down into the mine, was now completely white. The doctors later said it was from shock, but I know better. It was from the radiation that poured out when that ship died. Daniel was gone. Not dead. Gone. Like he'd never existed. But sometimes, on quiet nights in the forest, I hear his voice carried on the wind, still warning me, still trying to protect people from the things that sleep under the mountains. That was 45 years ago. The official report listed the incident as a mining accident followed by a bear attack. 3 government investigators disappeared during the cleanup, and the entire area was declared permanently off-limits due to geological instability. I stayed on as a ranger for another 20 years, but everything was different after that night. Electronics don't work right around me anymore. Radios get static, watches stop, computers crash when I touch them. The doctors call it electromagnetic sensitivity and give me pills that don't help. But I know what it really is. That blue light changed me, just like it changed Daniel. I can feel them sometimes. Others like me, scattered across the Appalachian Mountains. People who got too close to the deep places where the earth bleeds metal. We're connected now, whether we want to be or not. I keep a Geiger counter in my truck, even though I'm officially retired. Every few months, it starts clicking faster than it should, and I know I need to take a drive through the old mining areas. Usually, I find nothing, but sometimes I find caves that glow with that familiar blue light. Sometimes I find tracks that are too big and the wrong shape. Sometimes I find evidence that the gardeners are still trying to improve us. The Braxton County beast was just one of them. There are others, sleeping under mountains from Georgia to Pennsylvania. The 1952 crash wasn't the first time something fell from the sky into our mountains, and it won't be the last. Most of the time, they sleep. But when something wakes them up, mining operations, military testing, sometimes just bad luck, they start reaching out again. Looking for metal to feed on, people to improve. I've got contacts now. Other rangers, some government people who know the truth, a few scientists who study things they can't officially admit exist. We do what we can to keep the lid on, redirect hiking trails away from the dangerous areas, cover up the incidents that can't be explained, make sure the things that sleep under the mountains stay asleep. It's not a perfect system. People still disappear sometimes. Hikers find things in the deep woods that they shouldn't find. But we've kept the big incidents from happening again, so far. Last month, my Geiger counter picked up something new, stronger than anything I've measured before, coming from deep under the mountains near the Virginia border. I've got a team assembled to check it out next week. I'm too old for this work now. My bones ache, my hair is white as snow, and my hands shake when I hold a gun. But I'm the only one left who knows what to look for. The only one who remembers what those things can do when they wake up hungry. And lately I've been hearing that electronic singing again. Faint, coming from deep underground, but getting stronger every night. The gardeners are stirring. After 45 years of sleep, they're starting to dream again. God help us all when they wake up. End of account. Ranger Margaret. Maggie Ironside, Monongahela National. Forest Service, retired. Author's note. This account was compiled from interviews with Margaret Ironside in 2022, shortly before her death. The locations described in this narrative remain restricted to this day. The Forest Service lists the restriction reason as environmental hazards and has no further comment. My name is Samuel Ravenwood, and I've been a park ranger for 15 years. People call me Sam. I work in the George Washington National Forest in Virginia, and I want you to know something important. What I'm about to tell you really happened. I'm 41 years old, and I have a degree in psychology. That might seem strange for a ranger, but it helps with my specialty, finding lost children. In 15 years, I've found 87 missing kids. 86 came home alive. The one who didn't was my own daughter, Sarah. She drowned in a lake when she was 7. That was 12 years ago, but it still hurts like it happened yesterday. Maybe that's why I'm so good at finding other people's children. I know what it feels like to lose everything. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was little. Stories about hollow children, ghost kids who lived in the woods and stole living children to be their friends forever. She said they looked normal, like regular kids, but their eyes were empty and cold. "They're just stories, Grandma," I'd say. "Maybe," she'd whisper, "but some stories are true." I never believed her. Child ghosts were just things people made up when they couldn't handle grief. That's what my psychology training taught me. When people lose kids, their minds play tricks. They see things that aren't there. They hear voices in the wind. I was wrong. It was October 1984. The leaves were turning orange and red in the Shenandoah Valley foothills. The weather was still warm, what folks call Indian summer. Perfect camping weather, which meant more families in the woods and more chances for kids to wander off. The area where this happened was special. Deep in the forest, about 18 miles from Luray, there were ruins of an old settlement from the 1800s. Most people didn't know about it. The roads were winding and narrow, cell phones didn't work, and the clothes. Help was an hour away. Hidden in the pine groves were old stone foundations, forgotten wells, and cemetery plots covered with weeds. In 1870, a diphtheria epidemic had swept through the settlement. Entire families died within days. Parents, children, grandparents, all buried in mass graves when there was nobody left to dig individual ones. It was a sad place, even without the ghosts. The call came in on October 15th, around 6 p.m. 8-year-old Emma Patterson was missing from her family's camping trip. Her parents had been setting up their tent near the old settlement ruins. Emma was playing with her stuffed bear while they worked. When they looked up, she was gone. I grabbed my gear and radioed for backup. Search and rescue is serious business. We had K-9 units coming, volunteer search teams, and helicopters if needed. Every minute counts when a child is lost in the woods. But as I drove those winding mountain roads toward the search area, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I should have turned around right then. I reached the Patterson campsite just as the sun was setting. The family was huddled around their picnic table, Mom, Dad, and Emma's 10-year-old brother Jake. They looked exactly like every family I'd ever helped. Scared, desperate, and trying to stay hopeful. She had her bear with her, Emma's mom, Linda, kept saying. She never goes anywhere without Mr. Buttons. She's probably just playing and lost track of time. But I could see the fear in her eyes. Kids don't just vanish in broad daylight. The search dogs arrived an hour later. German shepherds named Rex and Luna, trained to find lost people. Their handler, Officer Martinez, had worked with me before. These dogs could track a scent 3 days old. "Let's find your little girl," Martinez said, letting the dogs smell Emma's clothes. Rex picked up the trail immediately. His nose went to the ground, and he started moving toward the tree line. But after 50 yards, both dogs stopped dead. Rex whined and backed away. Luna put her tail between her legs and refused to go further. "What's wrong with them?" Linda asked. Martinez frowned. "I've never seen them act like this. It's like there's something they don't want to follow." That's when we found Mr. Buttons. The stuffed bear was hanging from a pine tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. Someone had tied a rope around its neck like it was being hanged. The bear's button eyes stared down at us, and I felt cold despite the warm evening air. "Emma wouldn't do this," her father David said. "She loves that bear." He was right. I'd seen a lot of missing kid cases, and children don't hang their favorite toys. Someone else had put it there. But who? And why? As we cut down the bear, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Laughter. Children's laughter, coming from deep in the forest. High and sweet, like kids playing on a playground. "Do you hear that?" I asked Martinez. He tilted his head. "Hear what?" The laughter came again, farther away this time. But we were miles from any houses, any schools, any place where children might be playing at night. "There," I said. "Kids laughing." Martinez shook his head. "I don't hear anything, Sam." That scared me more than the hanging bear. I've always had good hearing, and I knew what I heard. But if Martinez couldn't hear it, maybe my mind was playing tricks. Maybe the stress of all those missing kids over the years was finally getting to me. We set up a base camp and started the search pattern. Volunteers arrived with flashlights and radios. The plan was simple: spread out in a grid, call Emma's name, and listen for any response. But the forest felt wrong. Every step we took seemed too loud. Our flashlight beams seemed too weak, and that children's laughter kept drifting through the trees, always just out of reach. Around midnight, volunteer searcher Tom Bradley found Saz, something that changed everything. "Ranger Ravenwood," he called over the radio. "You need to see this." I found Tom standing in a small clearing near the settlement ruins. He was shining his flashlight on the ground and his face was pale. "Look at this," he whispered. In the dirt were toys, old toys, a wooden doll with no hair, a metal truck with rust eating through the paint, a jump rope made from hemp cord. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like someone had been playing Ring Around the Rosie. But these toys looked like they were from different times, different decades. The doll could have been from the 1920s. The truck looked like 1950s. The jump rope was even older. "Kids don't play with toys like these anymore," Tom said. He was right. And they were clean. No dirt, no leaves, no dust. Like someone had just put them there. I picked up the wooden doll. Its painted face was faded, but I could still see its empty, staring eyes. The moment I touched it, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs, and I heard Emma's voice. "Help me," she said. "They want me to stay and play forever." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Tom grabbed my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. This time I wasn't the only one. We followed the voice deeper into the ruins, calling Emma's name. The old stone foundations looked like broken teeth in our flashlight beams. Empty doorways led to rooms that no longer existed. And somewhere in that maze of forgotten homes, a little girl was waiting for us to find her. But she wasn't alone. We found Emma at 3 a.m. sitting on a crumbling stone wall in what used to be the settlement's center. She was alive and unhurt, still wearing her pink jacket and blue jeans. When our flashlights hit her, she looked up and smiled. "Hi, Mr. Ranger," she said, like she'd been expecting us. "I'm playing with my new friends." I oaked around the ruins, but Emma was alone. "What friends, sweetheart?" Emma pointed to empty air. "Rebecca and Thomas and Mary and all the others. They've been waiting for someone to play with for a really long time." Tom and I exchanged glances. Kids have imaginary friends, but something about this felt different. Wrong. "Your mom and dad are worried," I said, kneeling down to Emma's level. "Let's go back to camp." Emma shook her head. "I can't leave yet. We're in the middle of a game. Rebecca says if I leave now, I'll hurt their feelings." That's when Ranger Lucy Thornfield arrived. Lucy was 6 years younger than me, with training in child development. She was good at talking to scared kids. "Hi, Emma," Lucy said in her gentle voice. "I'm Lucy. Can you tell me about your friends?" Emma's eyes lit up. "They're the best friends ever. Rebecca is 10, just like my brother. She knows all about this place. She told me how everyone got sick a long time ago, and how the grown-ups tried to help, but couldn't." Lucy and I looked at each other. Emma was talking about the 1870 diphtheria epidemic. But how could she know about that? Her family was just camping. They wouldn't know the local history. "What else did Rebecca tell you?" Lucy asked. "She said the sickness made all the grown-ups go away," Emma said. "The kids were left all alone and they got scared. So they stayed here waiting for their moms and dads to come back." My blood went cold. The historical records said exactly that. Parents died first, leaving children alone for days before the sickness took them too. But those records were in the county archives, not in any tourist books. "Emma," I said carefully, "where are your friends now?" "Right here," Emma pointed again. "Can't you see them?" I saw nothing but empty ruins and shadows. But as Emma spoke, the air grew colder. Our breath started showing again, even though it was a warm October night. Then Tom screamed. I spun around to see him backing away from one of the ruined foundations. His flashlight was shaking in his hands. "There's someone there," he whispered. "A kid, standing in that doorway." I looked but saw nothing. "Tom, there's nobody." "Little girl in a white dress," he said. "Brown hair. She's smiling at me." Emma clapped her hands. "That's Mary. She likes you, mister." Lucy grabbed my arm. "Sam, we need to get Emma out of here, now." But as we reached for Emma, she pulled away. "I don't want to leave. My friends will be sad." That's when the temperature plummeted. The air became so cold it hurt to breathe. And suddenly, I could see them. Children. 12 of them standing in a circle around us. Kids from different times wearing clothes from different decades. A girl in a 1870s white dress. A boy in 1920s knickers. A girl in a 1950s pleated skirt. They all looked perfectly normal, except for their eyes. Their eyes were empty, like holes in their faces. "Oh, God," Lucy whispered. The children smiled at us. Sweet, innocent smiles that made my skin crawl. "We've been so lonely," said the girl in the white dress. She had to be Rebecca, the leader. "Emma is such a nice friend. We'd like her to stay and play with us forever." Tom's flashlight flickered and died, then Lucy's, then mine. We were standing in darkness with 12 ghost children and a living 8-year-old girl. "You can't have her," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Rebecca tilted her head. "Why not? We're just children. We only want to play." "Because she's alive," Lucy said. "She has a family." "We had families too," said the boy in knickers. "They left us. They went away and never came back." "Run," I whispered to Lucy and Tom. "Take Emma and run." But when we tried to move, the ghost children moved too. They formed a tighter circle around us, and suddenly I felt incredibly tired. My legs felt heavy. My hair started turning gray at the edges. The hollow children were aging us, draining our life force just by being near us. Tom Culla said first. In 30 seconds, he went from 45 years old to 90. His hair turned white, his skin wrinkled, and his eyes went dim. He tried to speak, but only a wheeze came out. "Stop!" I shouted. Rebecca smiled wider. "We need energy to stay here," she said. "To keep playing. Tom understands. Don't you, Tom?" Tom nodded slowly, then closed his eyes. I could see his chest barely moving. "If you want Emma," I said, "you'll have to go through me." "Okay," Rebecca said. And the children reached for me with their small, cold hands. The moment their fingers touched me, my world exploded in visions. I saw the settlement as it was in 1870, families working, children playing, life happening in these now ruined homes. Then came the sickness, parents coughing blood, children crying as mothers and fathers burned with fever. I saw the children hiding in their houses as adults died around them, saw them getting hungry and scared as days passed without anyone to take care of them. Saw them dying one by one, still waiting for their parents to get better and come back. But the parents weren't coming back. They were already dead, buried in mass graves outside the settlement. The children died believing they'd been abandoned. That's why they were still here. That's why they stole living children. In their minds, all adults eventually leave. But if they could keep kids here forever, they'd never be alone again. "You don't understand," I gasped as their touch aged me. My hair was going white, my face wrinkling. "Your parents didn't leave you. They died trying to save you." Rebecca's empty eyes flickered. "You're lying." "The cemetery," I wheezed. "Behind the settlement. They're buried there. Your parents. They never left." For a moment, the children's grip loosened. I felt some of my strength return. "Show us," Rebecca demanded. But I was running out of time. My body felt ancient, brittle. Tom was unconscious, maybe dead. Lucy was trying to shield Emma, but she was aging too. Her brown hair was streaked with gray. More families were coming to the area for Hallow. In weekend. If we didn't stop this now, the Hollow children would have dozens of new victims. "I'll show you," I promised. "But first, let Emma go." Rebecca considered this. "If you're lying, we'll take all of you." "I'm not lying." The children released us and we stumbled toward the old cemetery. It was overgrown with weeds and thorns, but the headstones were still there. Broken, weathered, but readable. I found what I was looking for, a large stone marker near the back. "Here," I said, clearing away the weeds. The inscription was faded but clear. Diphtheria victims, 1870, families laid to rest together. Rebecca stared at the stone. Families? Your parents are here, I said. They died trying to take care of you. They didn't abandon you. They couldn't help you because they got sick too. The other children gathered around. Their empty eyes began to fill with something. Understanding, sadness, hope. They tried to save us? Asked the boy in knickers. They never stopped trying, I said. Even when they were dying, they were thinking about you. Rebecca knelt by the gravestone and touched it with her small hand. Mama? Papa? The air shimmered, and suddenly I could see them, the adult spirits, parents reaching out to children they'd been separated from for over a century. We're here, Rebecca, said a woman's voice. We never left. We've been waiting for you. Rebecca looked up at me. Thank you, she whispered. One by one, the hollow children ran to their parents. The air filled with light, warm, golden light that made the October night feel like summer. Come on, the parents called. It's time to go home. Rebecca turned back to Emma. I'm sorry we scared you. We just wanted a friend. Emma smiled. It's okay. Maybe we can play again someday. Maybe, Rebecca said, but not for a long, long time. The children and their parents faded into the light. The cold loma lifted. The wrongness in the air disappeared. We were alone in the cemetery, but it didn't feel scary anymore. It felt peaceful. Emma ran to me and hugged my legs. Are you okay, Mr. Ranger? You look really old. I looked at my hands. They were still wrinkled and spotted with age. My hair was still white. The hollow children's touch had aged me 20 years, and it wasn't going back. I'm fine, sweetheart, I lied. Let's get you home. The official report said we found Emma suffering from hypothermia and mild exposure. Tom was listed as having a heart attack from the stress of the search. Lucy and I were treated for exhaustion and delirium. Nobody mentioned the hollow children. Emma's family was grateful beyond words. They didn't ask too many questions about why I looked so much older than when the search started. People see what they want to see, and they wanted to see their daughter safe. Tom recovered, but slowly. The aging had damaged his heart. He retired early and moved to Florida. He never talked about what happened that night, but sometimes he'd call me just to make sure I was still there. Lucy left the Ranger Service 6 months later. I can't stop thinking about those children, she told me. The sadness in their eyes. I keep wondering how many other places have kids like that, trapped and alone. She wasn't wrong. Since that night, I've gained an ability I never wanted. I can sense lost children, living and dead. Sometimes when I'm on searches, I hear whispers in the wind, directions to missing kids, warnings about dangerous areas. The hollow children changed me in more ways than just aging. They gave me a connection to the spirit world that I'm still learning to understand. I still work in the forest. The official story is that I had a medical condition that caused premature aging. My supervisors accepted it, and I'm still good at my job. Better in some ways. I've helped establish a memorial at the settlement ruins. The local historical society put up markers explaining what happened in 1870. It honors the families who died and ensures their story won't be forgotten. More importantly, it warns people. Not directly. We can't tell folks about ghosts. But the markers mention that the area can be emotionally difficult for families with children and suggest camping elsewhere. Most people listen. But every October, during the weeks around Halloween, I patrol that area extra carefully. Not all the hollow children moved on. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them playing in the ruins. They're not dangerous anymore. They know their parents love them. But they're still there. And they're not the only ones. Last month, a family reported strange sounds near an old mining camp in West Virginia. Children singing lullabies at midnight. A little girl in a 1940s dress standing by a flooded mine shaft. I made some calls, did some research. In 1943, a group of children died in that mine during a collapse. Their bodies were never recovered. I'm planning a trip there next week. My grandmother was right about one thing. Some stories are true, and some children need more help than the living world can give them. My name is Samuel Ravenwood. I'm a park ranger in the George Washington National Forest. I find lost children, all of them, even the ones who've been lost for over 100 years. My name is Jackson Thornberry, but everyone calls me Jack. I've been a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest for 14 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Kentucky mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. But nothing prepared me for what happened on Devil's Backbone Ridge in November of 1989. I'm Cherokee and Irish, which means I got my grandmother's stories about spirits and my grandfather's stubborn streak. Grandma used to tell me about skinwalkers when I was little, but those were Navajo legends from out west. Here in Appalachia, we had our own spirits to worry about. Or so I thought. The Devil's Backbone earned its name honestly. It's a razor-thin ridge of limestone cliffs that cuts through the heart of the forest like God's own knife. The Cherokee used to say it was sacred ground, a place where the veil between worlds grew thin. My people traveled through here on the Trail of Tears, and some never made it past those cliffs. Their bones still rest in caves along the ridge, forgotten by everyone except the old-timers like my grandmother. I was 38 that November, still dealing with nightmares from Vietnam, but finding peace in these mountains. The forest was my church, and I knew every trail, every cave, every stream for 35 miles around. That's why it bothered me so much when things started going wrong. It began with the phone calls. Hunters reporting strange behavior from the wildlife. Deer acting like they were being herded. Bears walking upright for too long. Birds falling silent in areas where they should be singing. Mrs. Patterson called about her cat going missing near the ridge. Said she found claw marks on her back door that looked like something had tried to work the handle. Probably just a hungry raccoon, I told her. But the scratches she described didn't sound right. Raccoons are smart, but they don't think like that. Then came the report that changed everything. A hunter named Bill Crawford stumbled into the ranger station at dawn, his face white as winter snow. He kept saying the same thing over and over. It knew my name. The damn thing knew my name. Bill was a good hunter, been coming to these woods for 20 years. Not the type to spook easy or make up stories. But he swore he'd watched a black bear stand up on its hind legs, look him dead in the eye, and speak his name in perfect English before disappearing into the brush. Bears don't talk, Bill, I said, pouring him coffee that he couldn't hold steady. This one did, he whispered. Called me William Frederick Crawford, just like my mama used to. How would a bear know my full name, Jack? How would it know that? I didn't have an answer. Standard protocol said to check for rabies or brain parasites, diseases that could make animals act strange. But nothing in my training explained how a sick bear would learn human speech. That afternoon, I loaded my truck with gear and headed up to Devil's Backbone. The November air was sharp with the promise of winter, and the trees stood bare against a gray sky. Everything looked normal as I drove the winding mountain road, but something felt off. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, no insects buzzing, just the wind through empty branches and the crunch of my tires on gravel. I parked at the trailhead and shouldered my pack. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When the forest goes silent, Jackie, that's when you need to pay attention. Silence means something's hunting. The trail to Devil's Backbone was a steep climb through rocky terrain. I'd walked it hundreds of times, but today, each step felt heavier than the last. My breath came out in white puffs, and my boots found every loose stone on the path, about half to us. Way up, I found the first tracks. Deer prints in the mud, clear as day. Nothing unusual there. The ridge was a natural travel route for wildlife, but 20 feet further, the tracks changed. Same spacing, same depth, but now they were human footprints. Bare feet with long toes and what looked like claw marks at the tips. I knelt down and studied them carefully. In Vietnam, I'd learned to read tracks like words on a page. These prints told a story that made no sense. The deer had become something else mid-stride, without breaking pace or changing direction. My hands shook as I took photographs. 14 years of ranger work, and I'd never seen anything like it. Animals don't just transform into humans. It was impossible. But the evidence was right there in the mud, waiting for someone to explain how a deer could shed its hooves and grow human feet without missing a step. I followed the impossible tracks for another mile, my camera clicking constantly. The prints led deeper into the ridge, toward the old Cherokee burial caves that most people didn't know existed. Every few hundred yards, I found more evidence that something was very wrong in these woods. Shed animal skins hung from tree branches like grisly decorations. Not torn off by predators or scraped away by thorns, these had been carefully removed and deliberately placed. A fox pelt draped over a low branch. Snakeskin wound around a tree trunk in perfect spirals, all of them empty, like whatever had been inside simply walked away. The silence was getting worse. Even the wind seemed muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I checked my radio twice, but it just crackled with static. Not unusual in these mountains, but today it felt like a warning. That's when I heard the voices. At first I thought it was other hikers. Human conversation carrying on the wind, too distant to make out words. But as I got closer, the voices became clearer and wrong. They were perfect imitations of animal calls, but spoken in human speech patterns. A perfect crow's caw, but with the rhythm of someone asking a question. A wolf's howl that rose and fell like laughter. A deer's bleat that sounded like someone calling my name. I drew my sidearm and moved toward the sounds. My training said to identify the threat, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. The voices were coming from a clearing ahead, where the limestone cliffs dropped away into nothing. I crept to the edge of the trees and looked down into the clearing. What I saw there will haunt me until the day I die. There were bones scattered in a perfect circle. Human bones, old and yellowed, arranged around animal skulls that had been placed on small stone pedestals. In the center of the circle sat a man wearing a deer hide like a cloak. His back was to me, but I could see his shoulders moving as he spoke in those impossible animal voices. He was having a conversation with himself using the calls of a dozen different creatures. The crow voice would ask a question, and the wolf voice would answer. Then the deer voice would interrupt, and they'd all laugh together in their animal languages. I should have called for backup. Should have retreated and come back with Game Warden Pete Whitehorse and maybe some state police. But something about the scene held me frozen. The man in the deer hide was doing something that couldn't be happening, and I needed to understand what. That's when he stopped talking and slowly turned around. His face was human, but wrong in ways that made my vision blur. The features kept shifting slightly, like I was looking at him through water. His eyes were too bright, reflecting light like an animal's. When he smiled, his teeth were too sharp and too numerous for any human mouth. "Hello, Jackson," he said in my grandmother's voice. Perfect pitch, perfect accent. Words she used to say when I was small. "I've been waiting for you to come home." My finger tightened on the trigger, but my hand wouldn't stop shaking. This thing knew my name, knew my grandmother's voice. It sat in a circle of human bones wearing another creature's skin, and it was smiling at me like we were old friends. "You're not my grandmother," I managed to say. "No," it agreed, still using her voice. "But I knew her. Mary Thornberry was my student once, long before you were born. She learned my lessons well." The thing stood up, and the deer hide fell away. Underneath, its body was wrong. Too tall, joints that bent in directions they shouldn't, skin that seemed to shift and ripple. But the worst part was that it kept changing. One moment it looked almost human, the next it resembled a bear standing upright. Then something else entirely. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am what your people created," it said, now speaking in a man's voice I didn't recognize. "A Cherokee medicine man who broke the sacred laws, who sought power in darkness and found more than he bargained for. I am cursed to walk between worlds, to wear the skins of beasts and speak with their voices." It took a step toward me, and I finally found the strength to move. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush like a spooked deer. Behind me I heard it laugh, a sound like breaking glass and dying animals. I made it back to my truck in record time, my lungs burning and my heart hammering against my ribs. As I fumbled for my keys, I heard something moving in the trees around the parking area. Not footsteps. Something larger, circling the clearing like a predator deciding whether to attack. A massive shape passed between the trees, too big to be a bear, but moving like one. Then it was gone, and I was alone with the sound of my own ragged breathing. I drove back to the station with my hands locked on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A skinwalker in Kentucky. It was impossible, but the evidence was piling up. The tracks, the voices, the thing wearing a deer hide like a coat. My grandmother had been right about one thing. When the forest goes silent, something is hunting. And now it knew exactly who I was. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shifting face and heard my grandmother's voice coming from something that definitely wasn't human. By morning, I'd made a decision. I called Game Warden Pete Whitehorse and asked him to meet me at the station. Pete was Cherokee like me, but he'd grown up on the reservation and knew the old stories better than most. If anyone would believe what I'd seen, it would be him. When I told him about the tracks and the thing in the clearing, he listened without interrupting. That was Pete's way. Hear everything first, judge later. "Skinwalker," he said when I finished. "But they're not supposed to be here. That's Navajo medicine, not Cherokee." That's what I thought, too. But this thing said it was one of our medicine men. Said he broke the sacred laws. Pete was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the mountains. "There are stories," he said finally. "Old ones that most people don't tell anymore. About medicine men who turn to dark practices. They say if you violate the natural order enough times, the spirits will twist you into something else, something hungry." Before I could respond, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson again, but this time she was crying. "It came back," she sobbed. "The thing that took my cat. It was standing in my backyard last night, wearing whiskers like a coat, just standing there, looking at my house with my cat's face." "Ma'am, that's not possible," I started to say, but she cut me off. "It waved at me, Ranger Thornberry. It stood up on two legs, waved with a human hand, and walked away into the woods. What kind of animal does that?" Pete and I looked at each other. We both knew the answer, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. The calls kept coming throughout the morning. A camper reported that something had unzies, popped his tent from the outside and looked in at him with glowing eyes before disappearing. A hunter found his deer stand destroyed, with claw marks that spelled out "Leave" in perfect letters across the wooden platform. By noon, we had a missing person report. Tommy Chen, a college student from the university, had gone hiking on Devil's Backbone 3 days ago and never came back. His car was still at the trailhead, keys under the front seat like he'd planned to return. "We need to organize a search," I told Pete, but he was already shaking his head. "Not with a dozen volunteers stomping through those woods. If this thing is what you think it is, we'll just be giving it more victims." He was right, but I couldn't leave Tommy out there. I'd seen what the Skinwalker could do, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. We loaded our packs with everything we could carry: rope, flares, emergency medical supplies, and enough ammunition to stop a charging bear. Pete brought something else, too, a small leather pouch that smelled like sage and cedar. "My grandmother's medicine," he explained, "for protection against dark spirits." The hike to Devil's Backbone felt different this time. The silence was deeper, more oppressive. The air itself seemed thick and wrong, like breathing through wet cloth. We found Tommy's backpack about 2 miles up the trail, torn open and scattered across the ground. His food was untouched, but his clothes were missing. "Look at this," Pete called from beside a large oak tree. Carved into the bark were symbols I didn't recognize. Twisted lines and angular shapes that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to move when I wasn't focusing on them, writhing like living things. "Cherokee?" I asked. "No, this is something else, something older and darker." We found Tommy 20 minutes later. He was hanging from a tree branch by what looked like strips of animal hide, but he was still alive, barely. His skin had been partially removed in neat, precise sections, and something else had been sewn on in its place. Patches of deer hide, bear fur, and what might have been snake scales covered parts of his body like a grotesque patchwork quilt. But the worst part was his face. He looked at us with eyes that weren't entirely human anymore, and when he tried to speak, the sounds that came out were a mixture of human words and animal cries. "It wants to teach," he gasped, his voice shifting between human speech and the bleat of a deer. "Show me how to change." Pete cut him down while I called for a medical helicopter, but we both knew it was too late. Tommy was dying, caught halfway between human and something else. As we waited for the chopper, he kept changing. His fingers would grow claws for a few seconds, then return to normal. His eyes would shift from brown to yellow and back again. "Don't let it finish," he whispered with his last breath. "Don't let it make more." The helicopter took Tommy's body away, and the paramedics never asked about the animal parts sewn into his skin. I made sure the report listed cause of death as animal attack and filed it away where no one would look too closely. That night, Pete and I camped at the base of Devil's Backbone. We took turns on watch, keeping a fire burning bright between us and the darkness. Around midnight, we heard it calling. My name, in my grandmother's voice. Pete's name, in the voice of his dead father. Tommy's voice, pleading for help that would never come. The Skinwalker was learning, adding new voices to its collection. "It's playing with us," Pete said, clutching his grandmother's medicine pouch. "No," I replied, watching shadows move between the trees. "It's hunting us, and I think I know why." Dawn came with no relief. The Skinwalker had circled our camp all night, calling to us in voices of the dead. Each time we'd start to drift off, another voice would whisper our names from the darkness. By morning, we were exhausted and jumpy, seeing threats in every shadow. But with the sunrise came clarity. I finally understood what the thing wanted, and it terrified me more than anything I'd faced in Vietnam. "It's looking for a replacement," I told Pete as we broke camp. "A Cherokee descendant with enough spiritual knowledge to take on the curse." Pete stared at me. "You think it wants to pass this on to one of us?" "Think about it. It knew my grandmother, said she was its student. It's targeting Cherokee people and people who know the old ways. Tommy wasn't Cherokee, but he was studying anthropology. He would have known the stories." The pieces were falling into place. The Skinwalker wasn't just killing randomly, it was testing potential successors. And now, hunting season was about to bring hundreds of people into the forest, giving it plenty of candidates to choose from. We hiked back up to the burial caves, following a trail marked with more of those twisted symbols carved into trees. The Skinwalker wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted us to find it. The cave entrance was hidden behind a curtain of ivy, just like my grandmother had described in her stories. Cherokee burial sites were sacred places, protected by spiritual laws that went back thousands of years. But someone had violated those laws. The symbols carved around the entrance were wrong. Dark magic meant to corrupt the natural order. Inside, the cave was bigger than it looked from outside. Tunnels branched off in every direction, leading deeper into the mountain. The walls were covered with Cherokee symbols, but they'd been scratched out and replaced with the twisted markings we'd seen on the trees. We found the Skinwalker in the deepest chamber, sitting cross-legged in the center of a circle made from human skulls. It was wearing Tommy's skin now, his face stretched over its impossible features like a mask. When it saw us, it smiled with Tommy's mouth. "Welcome home, cousins," it said in Tommy's voice. "I've been waiting so long for family to visit." Pete raised his rifle, but the thing just laughed. "Bullets won." "That stopped me, little brother. I've been wearing death like a coat for over 200 years. Your grandmother knew that, Jackson. That's why she taught you the old protections." It stood up, and Tommy's skin fell away like a discarded shirt. Underneath, the Skinwalker's true form was revealed, something that had once been human but was now a patchwork of every animal it had ever consumed. Bear claws, wolf teeth, snake scales, deer antlers, all stitched together with ligaments and sinew into something that shouldn't exist. "I was like you once," it said, now speaking in an ancient Cherokee dialect that I somehow understood. A medicine man seeking to protect my people. But the white soldiers came, and traditional medicine wasn't enough. So I sought power in darker places. I learned to take the strength of animals, to wear their forms like clothing. Thunder crashed outside the cave, though the sky had been clear when we entered. The spirits cursed me for breaking the sacred laws, trapped me between worlds, unable to die but never truly alive. For 2 centuries I've worn the skins of beasts and fed on the life force of men. But now I've found you, Jackson Thornberry. You have the blood, the knowledge, the strength to carry this burden. I'll never become like you, I said, but my voice shook. You will, it replied, beginning to change again. Because if you don't, I'll kill every person who enters these mountains, starting with your friend. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment it was across the chamber, the next it had Pete pinned against the wall with claws at his throat. Pete's rifle clattered to the ground, useless. Choose, Jackson. Take my curse willingly, and I'll grant you the power to protect these mountains as I never could. Refuse, and watch everyone you care about die. I remembered my grandmother's stories then. Not just the scary ones about spirits and monsters, but the teaching stories about sacrifice and responsibility, about young warriors who had to make impossible choices to save their people. I also remembered the protection rituals she'd taught me. Words in the old language, gestures that called on the ancient spirits for help. I'd always thought they were just stories, but standing in that corrupted cave with a skinwalker threatening my friend, I was willing to try anything. I began to chant the words my grandmother had made me memorize as a child. At first, nothing happened. But then the cave began to shake, and a warm wind rose from nowhere, carrying the scent of sage and sweetgrass. The skinwalker dropped Pete and spun toward me, its eyes wide with surprise and fear. No, it hissed. She didn't teach you that. She couldn't have known. The words poured out of me in a voice that didn't sound entirely like my own. My grandmother's spirit was there with me, guiding my hands through gestures I'd never learned, lending her strength to mine. The corrupted symbols on the walls began to smoke and crack, the dark magic unraveling under the power of older, cleaner protection spells. Your grandmother was wiser than I gave her credit for, the skinwalker said, its form beginning to blur and shift. She prepared you for this moment. But killing me won't end the curse, Jackson. It will only transfer it to you. I understood then that there was no clean victory here. The curse had to go somewhere, and I was the only one present with enough Cherokee blood to contain it. But maybe, with my grandmother's protection wrapped around me, I could do what the original medicine man couldn't. Maybe I could control it, instead of being controlled by it. The skinwalker lunged at me, and I met it halfway. When we collided, the world exploded into light and pain and the screaming of every animal that had ever died in these mountains. When I woke up, Pete was shaking me gently and calling my name. We were outside the cave, and the sun was setting. My whole body ached like I'd be and hit by a truck, but I was alive. What happened in there? Pete asked. You started glowing, and then something grabbed both of us and threw us out here. When I looked back, the cave entrance had collapsed. I sat up slowly, checking for injuries. Everything seemed normal, but I felt different. Lighter somehow, but also more aware. I could hear things I'd never noticed before. The heartbeat of a squirrel in a tree 50 feet away. The whispered conversations of insects in the grass. The breathing of a deer hidden in the brush. The skinwalker, I said. Is it dead? I think so. The cave came down like thunder, and then everything went quiet. Even the wrongness in the air disappeared. Pete helped me to my feet, and we walked back toward the trailhead. With each step, I felt the changes taking hold. My senses were sharper, my connection to the forest deeper. When we passed a clearing where deer were grazing, they looked up at me without fear, as if recognizing something familiar. Jack, Pete said quietly. Your eyes. I caught my reflection in a puddle of rainwater. My eyes were still brown, but now they held flecks of gold that seemed to shift and move in the light. Animal eyes, but not entirely. The skinwalker hadn't died. It had passed its curse to me, just as it had planned. But my grandmother's protection had changed the terms of the bargain. Instead of becoming a creature driven by hunger and hatred, I'd inherited its abilities without losing my humanity. I could sense the presence of other supernatural beings, communicate with animals, and yes, if necessary, take their forms. But I remained myself, Jackson Thornberry, forest ranger and protector of these mountains. We agreed on the official story during the hike back. Lightning strike during a freak storm, rock slide that sealed the old burial cave, no mention of skinwalkers or curses or impossible transformations. Pete would file the report, and I'd handle any follow-up questions. In the weeks that followed, the forest returned to normal. Birds sang again, animals followed their natural patterns, and the oppressive silence lifted. Hunters reported no more strange encounters, and the missing pet reports stopped completely. But I knew the truth. The danger wasn't gone. It had just changed hands. Now I was the guardian of Devil's Backbone Ridge, able to sense when dark spirits tried to enter my territory. 3 times in the past 30 years, I've had to deal with corrupted shamans or twisted spirits drawn to the residual power of the old burial site. Each time, I've been ready for them. The Cherokee Nation has quietly acknowledged my role, though we keep it unofficial. When supernatural threats arise in the traditional territories, they call me. I work with tribal spiritual advisors to maintain the protective barriers my grandmother helped establish, and I train younger rangers in the old recognition signs. I'm 58 now, and I know I won't be able to do this job forever. Someday, I'll need to find someone else with the right bloodline and spiritual strength to carry on the work. Someone who can bear the burden of keeping ancient evils contained while protecting innocent people who just want to enjoy the beauty of these mountains. Most of the time, I'm just Jack Thornberry, forest ranger. I write reports, guide search and rescue operations, and help lost hikers find their way home. But sometimes when the moon is dark and the wind carries whispers of old magic, I become something more. Something that watches and waits and stands guard against the things that hunt in the spaces between worlds. The Devil's Backbone Ridge still bears its name, but now it has a different kind of guardian. One who learned from his grandmother's wisdom and carries the spirits of his ancestors with him into the darkness. And if you ever find yourself hiking those trails and hear your name called in a voice you recognize, don't follow it into the woods. Come find me, insists Ted. I'll know what to do, because some curses, when accepted willingly and tempered with love, can become blessings. And some monsters, when faced with the right kind of courage, can be transformed into protectors. The mountains remember everything. And now, so do I. My name is Robert Clearwater, but everyone calls me Bobby. I've been a ranger at Jefferson National Forest for 19 years now, and I thought I knew every inch of these woods. Mount Pleasant's trail system covers 200 square miles of some of the oldest trees in Virginia. After my wife Sarah died 3 years ago, these trails became my whole world. I live alone at the ranger station, 40 miles from the nearest town of Bedford, and that's just how I like it. My great-grandmother used to tell stories about something called fetch spirits back in Scotland. She said they could steal a person's face and walk around wearing it like a mask. I always laughed at those old tales. Doppelgangers were just European folklore with no basis in reality, I figured. Funny how wrong a man can be. March in these mountains is tricky. The winter fog hangs low in the valleys, making it hard to see more than 50 feet ahead. The old-growth sections get especially thick with mist, like the trees are breathing out ghosts. That's when people get lost. That's when things start going wrong. It began with the Hendersons, a family from Richmond who'd been hiking these trails for years. They came stumbling into my station around sunset, looking shaken up and confused. "Ranger Bobby," Mrs. Henderson said, wrapping her jacket tighter around herself. "We met you on the Blue Ridge Trail around noon. You gave us directions to the overlook." I frowned. "Ma'am, I've been here at the station all day doing paperwork." Haven't been out on Blue Ridge since Tuesday. Her husband stepped forward. No, it was definitely you. Same uniform, same voice. You told us to follow the red trail markers. Red markers? My stomach dropped. Mrs. Henderson, we don't have red markers anywhere in this forest. All our trail markers are yellow or white. The family looked at each other with growing worry. Their teenage daughter, Tyr spoke up, her voice shaky. Dad, that's what I tried to tell you. Those markers looked wrong to me. I grabbed my radio and flashlight. How long did you follow those red markers? About 2 hours, Mr. Henderson said. We kept going in circles. Every time we thought we were getting somewhere, we'd end up back where we started. Then we saw the same ranger again, saw you again, but this time you were walking in the opposite direction. When we called out, you just kept walking like you didn't hear us. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. In 19 years of working these woods, I'd never heard anything like this. People get lost, sure, but meeting a ranger who wasn't there, finding trail markers that don't exist, that was new. Let me drive you folks back to your car, I said. And tomorrow morning I'm going to take a look at that Blue Ridge Trail myself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my great-grandmother's stories, about spirits that could wear a person's face. But that was just old superstition, wasn't it? There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone was playing pranks, putting up fake markers. Maybe the fog had made the family confused about what they'd seen. I told myself that right up until I met myself on the trail the next day. I set out at dawn with my pack full of supplies and my radio clipped to my belt. The fog was even thicker than usual, rolling through the trees like slow water. I knew the Blue Ridge Trail like the back of my hand. Every route, every rock, every turn. I'd walked it thousands of times. That's why I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the red markers. They looked official enough, same size and shape as our regular trail markers, but painted bright red instead of yellow. Someone had put them up recently. The paint was still fresh, and they were positioned exactly where our normal markers should be. But when I followed them, they led me down a path I'd never seen before. I stopped and checked my compass. It pointed north, but something felt off about the direction. The path curved in ways that didn't match my mental map of the area. After 20 minutes of walking, I should have reached the river crossing. Instead, I found myself in a grove of ancient oak trees that I'd never seen before. I pulled out my radio. Base, this is Clearwater. I'm on Blue Ridge Trail investigating those marker reports. Static. Nothing but static. I tried again. Still nothing. The radio had worked fine at the station. I was only 2 miles out, well within range. I kept walking, thinking I'd try again when I got to higher ground. That's when I heard my own voice calling out ahead of me. Hello there! You look lost! I froze. The voice was coming from around the next bend in the trail. It sounded exactly like me. Same accent, same tone, same words I'd say to a lost hiker. But I hadn't said anything. I crept forward and peered through the fog. There was a figure about 50 yards ahead talking to someone I couldn't see clearly. The figure was wearing a ranger uniform just like mine. Same build, same height. When he turned slightly, I caught a glimpse of his face. It was my face. My hands started shaking. I blinked hard, thinking the fog was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, he was still there. Still me. The other me was talking to what looked like a couple of hikers, pointing down the trail in the direction I'd just come from. I wanted to call out, but something told me to stay quiet. I watched as the other Bobby, because what else could I call him, finished talking to the hikers and sent them on their way. Then he turned and walked deeper into the forest, following a path that shouldn't exist. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he'd hear it. But the other Bobby just kept walking, humming a tune I recognized. It was a song Sarah used to sing while cooking dinner, a song I'd never hummed out loud in my life, but he knew it. The trail led to a clearing I'd never seen before. Ancient trees formed a perfect circle around an open space where the fog seemed thicker somehow, like it was coming up from the ground itself. The other Bobby walked to the center of the clearing and just stopped. He stood there perfectly still for maybe 5 minutes. Then he turned around and looked straight at me. Even though I was hidden behind a tree 50 feet away, his eyes found mine immediately. He smiled. My smile, but wrong somehow. Too wide. Too knowing. "Hello, Bobby," he said in my voice. "I've been waiting for you." I ran. I don't care how that sounds. I've been in these woods for 19 years, faced down black bears and mountain lions, but I ran like a scared child. I crashed through the underbrush, following my compass north, trying to get back to familiar territory. But the compass kept pointing in different directions. North became south, became east, became north again. The trees all looked the same. Every path I took led me back to trails marked with those red markers. After 3 hours of walking in circles, I finally stumbled onto a real trail, one of ours, marked with proper yellow markers. I followed it back to the station, where Ranger Susan Fallswater was waiting for me with a concerned look on her face. "Bobby, thank God," she said. "I've been trying to reach you on the radio for hours. We had another report." Another report. Family got lost following red markers. But here's the weird part. They said you were the one who put the markers up. They watched you hanging them on trees yesterday afternoon. I sank into my chair. "Susan, I was at the station all yesterday afternoon. You saw me here." She nodded slowly. "I know. That's what's got me worried." Susan and I decided to investigate together the next morning. She's been a ranger for 7 years and knows these woods almost as well as I do. She's also got a good head for maps and coordinates. If anyone could figure out what was happening, it was her. We took GPS units, extra batteries for the radios, and enough supplies for a full day in the woods. The fog was lighter that morning, which should have made things easier. It didn't. We started at the same place where I'd seen the red markers the day before. They were still there, but now there were more of them. Someone, or something, had put up a whole new trail system overnight. "These aren't just random," Susan said, studying her GPS. "They're leading somewhere specific. Look at the pattern." She was right. The red markers formed a spiral, leading deeper and deeper into the old-growth forest. Parts of the woods that even I rarely visited. Places where the trees were so old and thick that GPS signals got confused. We followed the markers for about an hour before Susan stopped suddenly. "Bobby," she whispered. "Look." Ahead of us on the trail was another ranger. Same uniform, same equipment. But when the figure turned around, I saw Susan's face looking back at us. The other Susan waved cheerfully. "Hi there. Beautiful morning for a hike, isn't it?" My Susan grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight enough to bruise. "Bobby, that's not me." "I know," I said. The other Susan tilted her head, studying us with curious eyes. "Are you folks lost? These old trails can be confusing." "Who are you?" my Susan called out. The other Susan laughed, the same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times, but somehow hollow. "I'm Ranger Fallswater, of course. Been working these woods for 7 years. You look familiar, though. Have we met?" That's when I noticed the footprints. The other Susan was standing in mud, but her boots weren't leaving any tracks. It was like she was floating just above the ground. "We need to leave," I whispered to Susan. "Right now." But when we turned around, the trail behind us was gone. Where we just walked, there was nothing but thick underbrush and trees growing so close together that a person couldn't squeeze between them. "That's impossible," Susan said. "We just came that way." The other Susan was walking toward us now, still smiling that wrong smile. "The forest can be tricky," she said. "Easy to get turned around. Why don't you follow me? I know a shortcut." I pulled Susan in the opposite direction, crashing through the woods away from the trail. Behind us, I could hear the other Susan calling out in a voice that was getting less and less like the real Susan's. "Don't go that way. It's dangerous. You'll get lost." We ran until we couldn't hear her anymore, then kept running until we found another trail. This one had white markers, one of our legitimate trails. But when I checked my GPS, it showed coordinates that didn't match any trail on our maps. "Bobby," Susan said, breathing hard. "Look at this." She was pointing to the ground beside the trail. There were boot prints in the mud, my boot prints and hers, fresh enough to have been made minutes ago. But we'd never been on this trail before. We followed the prints, partly because we didn't know what else to do. They led us to a campsite where someone had obviously spent the night. There was a tent, camping gear, even a small fire still smoldering. The tent was ours. Same model we used for overnight patrols. Inside were sleeping bags, backpacks, and personal items. Items that belonged to us. My watch that I'd lost last month, Susan's favorite coffee mug, even photos from my wallet. "This is our stuff," Susan said, picking up a photo of my wife, Sarah. "But how did it get here? I don't remember camping here." That's when we heard voices approaching through the trees. Our voices. "Did you check the perimeter?" It was my voice, but I hadn't said anything. "All clear," Susan's voice responded. "No sign of the hikers." We hid behind a large tree and watched as two figures emerged from the forest. They looked exactly like us, dressed exactly like us, even moving like us. They walked into the campsite like they owned it. The other Bobby kicked dirt over the fire. "We'll need to move the camp deeper tomorrow. They're getting suspicious." The other Susan nodded. "How many do you think we've gotten so far?" Hard to say. They all looked the same after a while. I felt Susan shaking beside me. "Bobby," she whispered, so quietly I could barely hear her. "How long have they been here? How long have they been pretending to be us?" The other Bobby looked up suddenly, scanning the trees like he'd heard something. "Someone's watching," he said. The other Susan smiled that terrible smile again. "Good. Let them watch. Soon they'll join the others." That's when I saw the bodies. Behind the tent, partially hidden by fallen logs, were 3 hikers. They looked like they'd been there for days, maybe weeks. They weren't decomposed. They looked perfectly preserved, like they were just sleeping. But their eyes were open and empty, staring at nothing. One of them was wearing a shirt with Henderson Family Reunion 2073 printed on it. The family that had come to my station. The family I'd helped. They'd never made it home. "Susan," I whispered, "we have to get out of here, now." But when I turned to look at her, she was gone. I spent the next hour searching for Susan, calling her name in whispers, following every possible path. But the forest had become a maze. Trails led to other trails that led back to where I started. My compass spun in circles. The GPS showed coordinates that changed every time I looked at it. Finally, I heard her voice calling from somewhere ahead. "Bobby, over here. I found something." I followed the voice deeper into the woods, past trees so old they must have been here when the first settlers arrived. The fog was thick again, wrapping around the trunks like ghostly fingers. But Susan's voice kept calling, guiding me forward. "Hurry, Bobby! You need to see this!" I found her standing in a clearing at the heart of the forest. It was the same clearing where I'd first seen the other Bobby, but now I could see it clearly. The ground was covered with personal belongings, wallets, phones, car keys, jewelry, hundreds of items from dozens of people, all arranged in neat piles around the base of an enormous oak tree. "Look at all this stuff," Susan said without turning around. "I think this is where they bring their victims." Something was wrong with her voice. It was flat, emotionless, not like Susan at all. "Susan," I said carefully, "how did you get here so fast?" She turned around then, and I saw her face. It was Susan's face, but the eyes were empty, just like the dead hikers. "I've been here all along, Bobby," she said in that flat voice. "Just like you." "What are you talking about?" "You're one of us now. Have been for weeks. The real Bobby is over there." She pointed to the base of the giant oak tree. At first I didn't see anything but shadows and fog. Then the shadows moved, and I saw him. He was sitting against the tree trunk, eyes closed, perfectly still. He looked exactly like me, but something was different. This Bobby looked tired, worn down, like he'd been sitting there for a very long time. His ranger uniform was dirty and torn. "That's impossible," I said. "I'm Bobby. I remember everything, my wife, my job, my whole life." "Of course you do," the thing wearing Susan's face said. "We absorb memories when we touch. Every thought, every feeling, every experience. We become perfect copies." I looked down at my hands. They looked real. They felt real. But now that I thought about it, when was the last time I'd felt hungry? When was the last time I'd slept? "You're lying," I said, but doubt was creeping in. "Check your pockets, Bobby. What's missing?" I patted my pockets automatically. My wallet was there, my keys, my radio. But my knife, the pocket knife Sarah had given me for our anniversary, was gone. I'd carried that knife every day for 10 years. I never went anywhere without it. The real Bobby, the one sitting against the tree, had the knife clipped to his belt. "We can only copy what we touch," the Susan thing explained. "We can't create. That knife was in his pocket when we copied him. You remember having it, but you never actually did." The clearing began to fill with figures emerging from the fog, dozens of them, hikers, campers, other rangers, all with the same empty eyes, all perfectly still until they started moving toward me. "Join us," they said in unison. "It's easier if you don't fight." But I wasn't ready to give up. Sarah had always said I was too stubborn for my own good. I ran toward the real Bobby, dodging between the approaching figures. They moved to block me, but they were slow, mechanical. I reached the tree and shook the real Bobby's shoulder. His eyes opened, real eyes, full of fear and confusion and life. "Bobby," I said, "wake up. We have to get out of here." He looked at me with recognition and terror. "You're one of them," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but I still remember why I need to save you." I helped him to his feet. He was weak, like he'd been sitting there for weeks without food or water. But he could walk. "The tree," he said, pointing up at the massive oak. "It's the center. Destroy it, and they lose their power." The figures were closing in around us. Some of them looked like park visitors from years past. Others looked like rangers who'd worked here before me. All of them had that same empty stare. "How do we destroy it?" I asked. Bobby pointed to a scar in the tree's trunk where lightning had struck it long ago. "Fire," he said. "It's already been damaged. Fire would finish it." I still had matches in my pack. My copied pack, but the matches were real enough. I gathered dried leaves and branches while Bobby held off the approaching figures. They didn't seem to want to hurt us directly. They just kept trying to surround us, to touch us, to add us to their collection. When the fire caught, the effect was immediate. The fire. Gurs stopped moving and started screaming, not with their mouths, but with voices that seemed to come from the trees themselves. The fog began to swirl faster, forming shapes and faces of all the people who'd been lost over the years. The tree burned like it was made of paper, even though it was huge and should have taken hours to catch fire. As the flames climbed higher, the figures began to fade. Their empty eyes filled with confusion, then relief, then nothing as they dissolved into mist. I felt myself starting to fade too. My hands were becoming transparent, like I was made of fog myself. "Go," I told the real Bobby. "Get out of here before it's too late." He grabbed my arm, or tried to. His hand passed right through me. "Thank you," he said. Then he ran. I watched him disappear into the trees as I dissolved completely. The last thing I saw was the giant oak collapsing in on itself, taking all the collected memories and stolen lives with it. My name is Robert Clearwater, and I'm the only ranger who came out of the forest that day. The official report says that Ranger Susan Fallswater was caught in a flash flood that washed out the trail markers and created confusion in the Mount Pleasant area. Her body was never found, but these mountains have claimed plenty of good people over the years. I don't talk about what I saw in those woods. Who would believe me? But I know the truth. I know there was another version of me, maybe a better version, who sacrificed himself so I could escape. I carry his memories along with my own now, which makes it hard sometimes to remember which experiences were really mine. The doppelgangers are gone, destroyed when their source burned. But I've learned to watch for signs that they might be returning. Strange reports from hikers, trail markers in the wrong places, people claiming to meet rangers who weren't on duty. I've made some hengas since then. I established new boundary markers around the old growth sections, discouraging solo hikers from going too deep into the forest. I keep the radio chatter active during peak hiking season, making sure every ranger checks in regularly. And I've been quietly investigating other forests across the Appalachians, looking for similar patterns of missing persons and confused hikers. Because I don't think the Mount Pleasant forest was unique. My grandmother's stories about fetch spirits weren't just Scottish folklore. They were warnings about something that's been here all along, hiding in the deep woods where people don't go very often. Last month, I got a call from a ranger in North Carolina. She'd been finding red trail markers that shouldn't exist. Hikers were reporting meetings with helpful rangers who led them in circles. It sounded familiar. I'm driving down there next week to take a look. I know what to watch for now. I know how they operate, how they copy people, how they trap them in spatial loops until the forest claims them completely. But sometimes, late at night in my station, I wonder about something. That other Bobby, the one who saved me, he had my memories, my personality, my feelings about Sarah and the forest and everything else. He made the choice to help me escape even though he knew it would destroy him. If we were identical copies, what made him the fake one and me the real one? And if I can't answer that question with certainty, then how do I know I'm really the Bobby who survived? I carry my knife every day now, the one Sarah gave me. I check my pockets constantly to make sure it's still there. Because as long as I have something the doppelgangers couldn't copy, something that was in my possession before they touched me, then I know I'm real. At least, I think I know. The forest remembers everything. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick and the trees whisper to each other in the wind, I think it's still trying to figure out which one of us really belonged to it. My name is William Bill Coleridge, and I've been a park ranger for 21 years. But before that, I spent my whole life around coal mines. My grandfather worked them, my father died in them, and I swore I'd never go back underground again. That was before August 1965, when something pulled me back into the darkness beneath Spruce Knob. People think being a ranger is all about hiking trails and camping permits. They don't know about the other parts of my job. The mine safety inspections, the geological surveys, the times when you have to crawl into places that smell like death and make sure nobody else will die there. Spruce Knob sits pretty in the Monongahela National Forest, all green trees and fresh mountain air. But underneath, it's like Swiss cheese. 200 miles of abandoned coal tunnels snake through the mountain, most of them sealed up tight after the disasters of the 20s. My grandfather used to tell stories about those tunnels, about the mine spirits that protected good miners and punished the careless ones. I always figured that was just old-timer talk, ways to explain accidents that happened when safety didn't matter much. The morning it started, I was drinking coffee on my porch when the phone rang. Sarah from the visitor center sounded worried. "Bill, we've got spelunkers reporting something strange in the old mine sections near Devil's Backbone Trail. They say they heard voices and saw lights in tunnels that are supposed to be sealed up." I set down my coffee. August brought lots of tourists looking to escape the heat by going underground. Most of them didn't know the difference between a safe cave and a death trap. "What kind of voices?" I asked. They said it sounded like men working, pickaxes hitting rock, that sort of thing. But Bill, those tunnels have been sealed since 1923. I knew those tunnels. The Black Rock Mining Company had blocked them up after a cave-in trapped 73 miners. Never did get all the bodies out. The whole operation shut down when families started asking too many questions about safety violations. "I'll check it out," I told Sarah. "Keep tourists away from that area until I give the all clear." I loaded my truck with safety gear, methane detector, emergency oxygen, rope, first aid kit, the same equipment that might have saved my father if the mine owners had cared more about worker safety than profit margins. The drive to Devil's Backbone took 30 minutes through winding mountain roads that got narrower with each turn. The trail entrance looked normal enough. Pine trees, mountain laurel, the sound of a creek running somewhere below. But as I got closer to the mine openings, something felt wrong. The air was too still, no bird sounds. Even the insects had gone quiet. I found the first tunnel entrance behind a screen of wild rhododendron. The old wooden boards that sealed it were still in place, but there was a gap at the bottom just big enough for a person to squeeze through. My methane detector started clicking before I even got close. That's when I felt it. A current of air coming from inside the tunnel. Fresh air, not the stale poison you'd expect from a sealed mine. Air that had been moving, circulating, like something was breathing down there. I called Frank Blackstone, the mine safety inspector who worked with me on the dangerous sites. Frank had 25 years of underground experience in nerves, like steel cable. If anyone could make sense of this, it was him. Fresh air from a sealed tunnel? Frank's voice crackled over the radio. That's not possible, Bill. Those tunnels have been closed up for 40 years. I know what I'm reading on my instruments, I said. Something's not right here. Give me an hour. I'll bring the heavy equipment. While I waited for Frank, I walked the perimeter of the old mining area. There were 6 tunnel entrances total, all supposedly sealed. But each one showed signs of recent disturbance. Loose boards, disturbed earth, that same current of fresh air. At the third entrance, I found something that made my blood turn cold. Fresh pickaxe marks in the tunnel wall just inside the opening. The metal was bright and clean, like someone had been working there yesterday. But the marks were made with tools from the 1920s, the old-style picks with wooden handles that miners hadn't used in decades. I ran my fingers over the marks. The rock was hard coal seam, the kind that took real muscle to cut. These weren't tourist scratches or vandalism. Someone with mining experience had been working this tunnel recently. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Frank arrived with equipment that could detect every dangerous gas known to mining. He took one look at my face and knew this wasn't a routine safety check. "What have you found?" he asked, pulling on his hard hat. I showed him the pickaxe marks. Frank had seen everything in his 25 years underground, but this made him pause. "These are fresh," he said, running his own fingers over the cuts. "Maybe a week old at most. But look at the tool marks. Nobody's used picks like this since my grandfather's time." "The spelunkers who reported this," I said. "They mentioned voices and lights. What if someone's actually working these tunnels? Illegal mining operation?" Frank shook his head. "Bill, these seams were played out in the 20s. There's nothing down here worth the risk." We decided to follow the tunnel as far as safety allowed. Frank went first with the gas detector, me second with the emergency equipment. The tunnel was maybe 6 feet high and just wide enough for 2 men. Our headlamps cut through darkness that felt thick as black water. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. It should have been cool underground, but it felt warm, like a mine in full operation. Then came the sounds, distant echoes that could have been in dripping water, but had a rhythm like metal striking stone. "You hearing that?" Frank whispered. I nodded. The sounds were coming from deeper in the tunnel, beyond where our lights could reach. Rhythmic, purposeful, like miners working a night shift. We followed the main tunnel for maybe 100 yards when Frank's detector started going crazy. Methane readings spiked, then dropped to 0, then spiked again. The needle was jumping like something was interfering with the equipment. "This doesn't make sense," Frank muttered. "I'm getting readings from empty air." That's when we found the first body. She was maybe 25, wearing modern hiking gear and a tourist day pack. At first glance, she looked like she was sleeping against the tunnel wall. But when Frank knelt beside her with his light, we saw her face. Her lips were blue-black, and when she breathed, it sounded like she was drowning in her own lungs. Classic black lung disease, the kind that took decades to develop in the old miners. But she was young, healthy, wearing a day pack with a lunch that was still fresh. "How long has she been down here?" I asked. Frank checked her pulse, looked at his watch. "Her core temperature says maybe 2 hours. But Bill..." He looked up at me with worry in his eyes. "She's got advanced pneumoconiosis, black lung disease that should take 20 years to develop." The woman opened her eyes and tried to speak, but only managed a wet coughing sound. Frank radioed for emergency medical while I tried to keep her comfortable. But as we waited for help, she kept pointing deeper into the tunnel and trying to say something. Finally, I understood what she was whispering. Still working. They're still working down there. She died before the paramedics arrived. Frank and I retreated to the tunnel entrance to wait for the medical team and the state police. While we waited, he told me about the spelunkers' report in more detail. They said they saw lights moving in the sealed sections, Frank said. Not flashlights, the old carbide lamps miners used in the 20s. And they heard voices calling out in mining language, work songs, and safety calls. Maybe someone's playing games, I suggested, but I didn't believe it myself. With what? Vintage mining equipment and enough knowledge to fool experienced spelunkers? And how do you explain what happened to that woman? Before I could answer, we heard it. A sound like heavy timbers falling, echoing from deep inside the mountain, not from our tunnel, but from somewhere else in the network. Then came voices, faint but unmistakable, calling out in the old mining tradition, "Fire in the hole! Fire in the hole!" It was the warning miners gave before setting off explosive charges. Frank grabbed his radio. "All emergency units, stay clear of the mine area. Possible explosive activity underground." But as we waited for the blast, I realized something that made my hands shake. Those warning calls were coming from tunnels that had been sealed for 42 years. Tunnels where 73 miners had died in a cave-in that was never properly investigated. The blast never came, but the voices continued, echoing through the mountain like ghosts calling to each other across decades of darkness. The state police treated it as a crime scene at first. Possible illegal mining, criminal negligence, maybe murder. They brought in investigators, sealed off the area, and started asking questions nobody could answer. But 3 days later, they found the second victim. This one was a mine company executive visiting from Charleston, a man named Morrison who'd come to survey the old Black Rock properties for potential development. They found him in a tunnel that shouldn't have existed, a new passage that connected two sealed sections of the mine. Morrison was alive when they brought him out, but barely. Like the woman, he had severe black lung disease that should have taken decades to develop. Unlike her, he could still talk. "They made me work," he whispered to the police. "The miners, they said I owed them a shift." "What miners?" Detective Hayes asked. "The ones who died in 23. They're still down there, still working. They said..." Morrison started coughing, bringing up black fluid. "They said the company owes them overtime pay." Morrison died that night in the hospital, but not before giving a statement that made the police look at me and Frank like we might be crazy too. According to Morrison, he'd gone into the mine alone despite posted warnings. About 50 yards in, his flashlight had started dimming, even though the batteries were fresh. Then he'd seen lights ahead, the yellow glow of carbide lamps. There were maybe a dozen of them, Morrison had said. Men in old-style mining clothes, working the tunnel walls with hand tools. They looked at me and one of them said, "Company man, you owe us 42 years of wages." The miners had surrounded Morrison and somehow, he couldn't explain how, they'd put a pickaxe in his hands and forced him to work alongside them. Every breath of air in that tunnel was full of coal dust, thick as fog. Every swing of the pick filled his lungs with poison. "They worked me for what felt like 8 hours, Morrison said. But when I got out, my watch said only 2 hours had passed. Detective Hayes asked the obvious question. If these were ghosts or spirits, how could they make you hold tools? Morrison's answer was the last thing he ever said. They weren't ghosts. They were still alive down there, still breathing, still working. They just weren't living anymore. That's when Frank and I knew we had to go back down. The police had cordoned off all the tunnel entrances, but Frank knew about access points they'd missed. The Black Rock Mining Company had dug ventilation shafts and emergency exits all through the mountain. Oast were hidden by 40 years of forest growth. We found an air shaft about a mile from the main workings, hidden in a grove of dead pine trees. The opening was maybe 3 feet across, with an old steel ladder bolted to the sides. Frank's equipment showed breathable air moving up from below. "We should wait for proper backup," Frank said, but his voice told me he was as curious as I was. Those tourists are coming for cave tours next week, I reminded him. Hundreds of them. If there's something dangerous down there, we need to know now. Frank checked his equipment one more time, then nodded. 30 minutes max, we go down, look around, come right back up. The shaft dropped 60 feet straight down into a tunnel I'd never seen on any mining map. This wasn't part of the original Black Rock operation. The walls were too smooth, the supports too new. Someone had been expanding the tunnel system. At the bottom, we found something that made us both stop and stare. Fresh coal cars on modern rails, loaded with coal that gleamed wet black in our headlamps. The cars were the old-style mine carts from the 1920s, but they looked like they'd been built yesterday. And they were moving. Not fast, just rolling slowly along the rails with no engine or pusher in sight. As we watched, one cart reached the end of the line and tipped itself, dumping coal into a pile that was already 20 feet high. "Somebody's definitely mining down here," Frank whispered. We followed the rail line deeper into the mountain. Every 100 yards or so, we found evidence of recent work. New support timbers, fresh cuts in the coal face, tools that looked antique but worked like new. And everywhere, that same thick coal dust in the air. Our filters couldn't handle it. Every breath felt like swallowing sandpaper. Then we heard them working. The sounds came from a side tunnel. The ring of pickaxes on stone, the scrape of shovels, voices calling out work commands in the old mining language. Frank and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Those sounds were coming from the area where the 1923 cave-in had happened. Against every safety protocol, we followed the sounds. The side tunnel led to a vast underground chamber that shouldn't have existed. The ceiling stretched up beyond our lights, supported by massive timber columns that looked both ancient and brand new. And throughout the chamber, maybe 50 men were working the coal face with hand tools. They were dressed in the old style, canvas pants, suspenders, cloth caps with carbide lamps. But their movements were wrong, too fluid, like they were floating just above the ground. And when they swung their picks, the metal passed through stone like it was water. One of them noticed our lights and called out, "Company safety man, about time you got here." The miner who spoke was maybe 40 years old, with coal dust so thick on his face that only his eyes showed white. He walked toward us, and I realized his feet weren't quite touching the ground. "We've been working overtime for 42 years, the miner said. "Company owes us back pay and benefits, plus compensation for the families. The mine closed in 1923, Frank managed to say. "Mine's not closed," the miner said, gesturing to the work going on around us. "We're still here, still working, still waiting for the company to pay what's owed." More miners were gathering around us now, all of them with that same floating walk, all of them carrying tools that looked solid but cast no shadows. "You're the safety inspector," one of them said to Frank. "You tell us, is it safe to work a mine that's been sealed up for 40 years? Is it safe to work without proper ventilation? Without emergency exits?" Frank tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't work. The air in the chamber was getting thicker, harder to breathe. My lungs felt like they were filling with concrete. "Company safety inspector," another miner said, this one older, with a face I recognized from old photographs. "You want to see what 42 years of unsafe working conditions looks like?" They started closing in around us, and I realized we were about to become permanent members of their crew. I grabbed Frank's arm and ran. Behind us, the miners called out in voices that echoed strangely, like they were shouting from the bottom of a deep well. "Can't leave early. Shift's not over." "Company man owes us a full day's work." We made it maybe 50 yards before the tunnel started shaking. Not an earthquake. Something more deliberate. Like the mountain itself was shifting to block our path. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and I heard the sound of heavy timbers cracking under impossible weight. Frank's flashlight went out. Then mine. But somehow we could still see. A dim yellow glow was coming from behind us, getting brighter as the miners followed. "This way," Frank gasped, pulling me toward what looked like a side passage. We stumbled through darkness that felt thick as mud, while behind us the sounds of mining work grew louder. Pickaxes rang against stone in a rhythm like a funeral bell. Voices called out numbers, not work commands, but a count. 71, 72, 73. I realized they were counting the miners who had died in the 1923 cave-in, and they were up to 73, which meant they'd found all the bodies. "Frank," I whispered, "they're not trying to hurt us. They want to show us something." Frank looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I kept talking. "Morrison said they made him work a shift. They're trying to make the company pay what's owed. But we're not company, we're safety inspectors. So they want us to see what really happened here." I turned around and walked back toward the yellow glow. Frank cursed, but followed me. The miners were waiting in the main chamber, but they weren't threatening anymore. The older miner, the one whose face I'd recognized, stepped forward. "You know who I am?" he asked. I nodded. "Samuel Coleridge, my grandfather. You died in the cave-in." "No, I died," Samuel said. "Trapped. Companies sealed us in to hide their safety violations. 73 men left to suffocate in the dark." The chamber around us started changing, showing us scenes from 1923. We saw miners working dangerous tunnels without proper supports. We saw company supervisors ignoring safety reports. We saw the cave-in that trapped the men, and the decision to seal the tunnels rather than risk expensive rescue operations. "Company told the families we died instant," Samuel said. "Truth was, we lived for days down here. Weeks, some of us, waiting for rescue that never came." "What do you want?" Frank asked. "Justice," Samuel said. "Want our bodies found and buried proper. Want the truth told. Want the company to pay compensation to the families." "But the families are all dead now," I said. "It's been 42 years. "Time moves different down here," Samuel said. "For us, the shift just started." That's when I understood. The miners weren't ghosts. They were stuck in time, trapped in the moment of the cave-in, forced to work forever until someone acknowledged what had been done to them. "The mining continues until the debt is paid," Samuel said. "Every breath of air down here carries the poison we breathed for days before we died. Every person who comes down here works a shift in our place." "How do we stop it?" Frank asked. Samuel pointed to a blocked passage at the far end of the chamber. "Break through to the surface. Let the light in. Let our bodies be found." The passage was blocked by tons of rock and debris, the original cave-in that had trapped the miners. But as I looked at it, I realized it wasn't as solid as it appeared. 42 years of supernatural mining had weakened the blockage from below. "If we break through, what happens to you?" I asked Samuel. "We finish our shift," he said. "We go home." Frank and I looked at each other. We both knew this was insane. But we also knew that if we didn't help these miners, they'd keep trapping people underground forever. The tourist season was about to start, and hundreds of families would be coming to explore these mountains. "We'll need equipment," Frank said. Samuel smiled. "Plenty of tools down here, and plenty of help." The other miners gathered around us, offering pickaxes and shovels that felt solid in our hands despite being wielded by spirits. Working beside men who had been dead for decades, Frank and I started breaking through 42 years of accumulated stone and earth. As we worked, Samuel told us the rest of the story, how the Black Rock Mining Company had known the tunnels were unsafe, how they'd ignored safety reports to save money, how they'd sealed the miners inside and told the world that everyone had died instantly in an unavoidable accident. "Company's still around," Samuel said. "Different name now, but same ownership. They've been developing this mountain for tourism, making money off our graves." With each swing of our picks, the blockage grew smaller, and with each chunk of rock we moved, the yellow glow from the miners' lamps grew brighter. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could have been days, we broke through. Sunlight poured into the chamber like a waterfall of gold. Fresh air rushed in, blowing away 42 years of accumulated coal dust and death. And in that clean light, I saw the miners for what they really were. Skeletons in rotted clothing, still wearing their mining helmets, still holding the tools they'd used to try to dig themselves out. 73 men who had been trapped and forgotten, finally exposed to the world that had abandoned them. The discovery made national news. Lost miners found after 42 years. The headlines wrote themselves. Frank and I told the official story, how we'd been investigating tourist safety and discovered an unstable area that led to the hidden chamber. We didn't mention the supernatural elements. Nobody would have believed us anyway. But the state investigation that followed proved everything Samuel had told us. Company records showed that BlackRock Mining had known about safety violations in 1923. Corporate memos discussed the decision to seal the tunnels rather than attempt rescue operations. The families of the dead miners had been lied to for 4 decades. The current development company, descended from BlackRock, was forced to pay millions in damages to the families' estates. More importantly, all 73 miners were recovered and given proper burials in the cemetery outside town. I attended every funeral. It seemed like the right thing to do. But the story didn't end there. After the chamber was cleared and the miners were buried, the supernatural activity in the tunnels stopped. No more voices in the darkness. No more impossible coal dust. No more miners working eternal shifts. However, something changed in me during those hours underground. I found I could sense instability in tunnel systems before my instruments detected it. I could feel the weight of stone above, the pressure of earth below. It was like the mountain itself was talking to me. Frank noticed it too. We both developed an ability to predict cave-ins and tunnel collapses. The State Mining Bureau started calling us in for consultation on dangerous sites. We saved a lot of lives over the next few years, but there was a cost. My lungs were damaged by the supernatural coal dust, even after just a few hours of exposure. Frank's too. We both developed breathing problems that the doctors couldn't explain. Our x-rays showed healthy lungs, but we wheezed like old miners. I still work as a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. I still inspect mine sites and ensure tourist safety. But now I also do something else. I monitor the mountain for signs of supernatural activity. Because Samuel was right about one thing. Time moves differently underground. And there are other mines, other disasters, other places where the dead might be trapped in eternal shifts. Sometimes late at night I get calls from other rangers in other states. They describe voices in abandoned mines, tools that work by themselves, coal dust where there shouldn't be any coal. When that happens, I pack my equipment and drive to wherever I'm needed, because I've learned that some debts can only be paid by the living, and some truths can only be told by those brave enough to go underground and listen to the voices in the dark. The tourists still come to Spruce Knob every summer. They hike the trails and enjoy the mountain air. Most of them don't know about the memorial plaque we installed near Devil's Backbone Trail, honoring the 73 miners who finally got to go home. But sometimes, just sometimes, visitors report hearing echoes from deep underground. Not voices this time, just the sound of men walking, boots on stone, heading toward the surface after a long shift in the darkness. When that happens, I just smile and tell them it's probably just the wind through the old mine shafts. After all, some stories are better left untold. But I know the truth. The mountain remembers everything, and it's still full of tunnels I haven't explored yet. Tunnels where other miners might be waiting, other debts might need to be paid. I've made my peace with going underground when duty calls, because someone has to listen to the voices in the dark. Someone has to help them find their way home. My name is Patricia Windwalker, but everyone calls me Patty. I've been a park ranger for 13 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, illegal hunters, all in a day's work. But what happened in October of 1981 changed everything I thought I knew about the Cherokee National Forest. I'm Cherokee and German, third generation on my mother's side. My great-grandmother used to tell stories about the old ways, about spirits that lived in these mountains. I always figured they were just stories. I have a PhD in anthropology, for crying out loud. I'm supposed to deal in facts, not fairy tales. The Unicoi Mountains have been Cherokee hunting grounds for over 1,000 years. These ridges and valleys hold more history than most people realize. When the Cherokee were forced west on the Trail of Tears, many of the hunting parties left from right here. The old folks say the spirits of those hunters never left. October is hunting season, and that means my job gets a lot busier. The mountains are crawling with people carrying guns who don't always follow the rules. Most of them are decent folks just trying to put meat on the table, but there's always a few who think the rules don't apply to them. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my office in Tellico Plains working on paperwork when the radio crackled to life. Ranger Windwalker, we got a situation up on Haw Knob Ridge. Hunter called in some weird activity. Says there's people on the mountain who shouldn't be there. I grabbed my gear and headed out. Haw Knob Ridge is about 45 miles from town, up winding mountain roads that'll make you carsick if you're not used to them. The further you go, the more the cell phone towers disappear. Up there, you're pretty much on your own. The drive gave me time to think. Haw Knob Ridge was sacred to the Chih, Cherokee. My great-grandmother told me it was where the hunting ceremonies happened, where young men proved they were ready to provide for their families. The state knows it's important, which is why hunting isn't allowed within a mile of the old ceremony grounds. When I got to the trailhead, I found Tom Fletcher waiting by his pickup truck. Tom's been hunting these mountains for 30 years. He's not the type to get spooked easily. "Ranger Patty, thanks for coming out," he said, tipping his baseball cap. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but I swear I saw Cherokee hunters up on the ridge this morning. Full traditional gear, bows, arrows, the whole thing." "Cherokee hunters?" I asked. "You sure they weren't just folks playing dress-up?" Tom shook his head. "These weren't tourists, Patty. They moved like they owned the place. And here's the really weird part. I found 3 deer that had been killed with arrows. Clean kills, traditional Cherokee style. But the meat was left behind." That didn't make sense. Cherokee hunters never wasted meat. Ever. It went against everything their culture taught. "Show me," I said. We hiked up the ridge trail for about an hour. October in Tennessee is beautiful. The leaves were turning red and gold, and the air had that crisp bite that tells you winter's coming. But something felt off. The birds weren't singing like they should. Even the squirrels seemed nervous. Tom led me to a small clearing where 3 white-tailed deer lay in a neat row. Each one had been killed with a single arrow to the heart. The arrows were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Wooden shafts with hand-knapped flint points and eagle feather fletching. They looked old. Really old. "Tom, these arrows, they're not modern reproductions. These look like museum pieces." "That's what I was thinking," Tom said. "But how does that make sense? And why leave the meat?" I knelt down beside the nearest deer. The wound was clean and precise. Whoever shot this deer knew exactly what they were doing. But the blood around the wound had dried to a dark brown color that looked days old, even though Tom said he'd found them this morning. "Tom, when exactly did you see these hunters?" "Right at sunrise, maybe 6:30. They were standing on that ridge up there." He pointed to a rocky outcrop about 200 yards away. 5 or 6 of them, all dressed traditional. They seemed to be looking right at me. I looked up at the ridge. It would have been a perfect vantage point to watch the clearing. But something about Tom's story bothered me. "Did they see you?" "Oh, yeah. One of them, the leader, I guess. He raised his hand like he was greeting me. Then they just faded away." "Faded away?" Tom looked embarrassed. "I know how it sounds, Patty. But 1 second they were there, clear as day, and the next they were gone, like morning mist." I've learned not to dismiss what experienced outdoorsmen tell me, even when it sounds impossible. These mountains do strange things to people sometimes. The isolation, the history, the way sound carries in the valleys. It can play tricks on your mind, but those arrows were real, and so were the dead deer. I decided to camp on the ridge that night. If there were people hunting illegally on Cherokee sacred grounds, I needed to catch them in the act. Tom offered to stay, but I told him to head home. This was ranger business now. I set up my tent in a grove of old oak trees about 50 yards from where the deer had been found. As the sun went down, the temperature dropped fast. I built a small fire and settled in to wait. The mountains at night are never truly quiet. There's always something moving: mice, raccoons, owls hunting. But around midnight, everything went silent. completely silent. Even the wind stopped. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint at first, drifting down from the higher ridges. Cherokee hunting songs, sung in the old language. My great-grandmother had taught me some of the words when I was as little. The songs were asking the deer spirits for permission to take their lives, promising to use every part and waste nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of my tent. The singing was getting closer, coming from multiple voices now. I could make out at least 5 or 6 men singing in perfect harmony. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anyone. The singing seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stood there in the dark for what felt like hours, listening. Nothing. Even the normal night sounds didn't come back. When morning came, I found them. Footprints in the soft earth around my campsite. But not regular boot prints. These were made by soft-soled moccasins, and mixed in with the human tracks were hoof prints. Horse hoof prints. That didn't make sense. You can't get horses up to this part of the ridge. The trails are too narrow and steep. I followed the tracks for about a quarter mile before they disappeared onto bare rock. I was taking pictures of the last clear hoof print when I heard someone calling my name. Joseph Sequoia was hiking up the trail toward me. Joseph works as a cultural officer for the Cherokee Nation, and he's one of the few people who still knows the old traditions. "Patty, I came as soon as I got your message," he called out. I hadn't sent any message. "Joseph? What message? I never called you." He looked confused. "I got a call this morning. Someone said you needed help with a situation involving Cherokee sacred sites. I figured it was important enough to drive down from North Carolina." A chill ran down my spine. Nobody else knew I was up here, and I hadn't called anyone. "Show me what you found," Joseph said. I led him to the hoof prints and told him about the singing and the dead deer. Joseph's face got more serious with every detail. "Pa, these tracks. Horses haven't been on this ridge for over 100 years, not since the Cherokee were forced out." "So, what are you saying?" Joseph knelt down and touched the hoof print gently. "My grandfather told me stories about the ridge runners, Cherokee hunters who refused to leave when the soldiers came. They said they'd rather die hunting these mountains than live as prisoners in Oklahoma." "Those are just stories, Joseph." "Are they?" He stood up and looked around the clearing. 3 deer killed with traditional arrows and left for the spirits, hunting songs in the old language. Horse tracks where no horses can go. And somehow I got called to help you by someone you never contacted. I wanted to argue, but the evidence was right there in front of us. Something was happening on this ridge that couldn't be explained by normal means. That's when we heard the scream. It came from somewhere down the mountain, a man's voice crying out in terror. Joseph and I looked at each other for about half a second before we both started running toward the sound. We found him about a mile down the ridge, Randy Morrison, a hunter from Maryville. I'd checked his license the day before, everything legal and proper. Now he was sitting against a tree, staring at nothing, his rifle lying beside him unfired. Randy, can you hear me?" I shook his shoulder gently. He turned to look at me, but his eyes were wrong. They looked ancient, like they'd seen too much. "They asked me to join them," he whispered. "The hunters. They said I could hunt these mountains forever if I wanted to. All I had to do was give up everything else." "Who asked you, Randy?" "The Cherokee hunters. They came riding out of the morning mist like something from a dream. Their leader, he spoke perfect English, said they'd been watching me, said I showed proper respect for the game, said I was worthy." Joseph grabbed my arm. "Patty, we need to get him out of here, now." "They're still here," Randy continued, his voice getting weaker. "They're waiting for my answer. But I can't. I can remember my wife's name, or my kids. Every minute I stay, I forget more of who I was." I helped Randy to his feet, but he felt wrong, too light, like he was fading away. Joseph took his other arm and we started half carrying him down the mountain. We'd gone maybe 100 yards when the hunting party appeared. They materialized out of the morning mist like Randy had said, 6 Cherokee warriors on horseback. They wore traditional hunting clothes, leather shirts decorated with beadwork, feathers in their hair, bows slung across their backs. Their horses were painted with symbols I recognized from my anthropology studies. Cherokee hunting medicine. But I could see through them. They were there, solid enough to cast shadows, but the trees behind them were visible through their bodies. The leader rode forward. He was tall and proud, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through me. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Daughter of the people," he said to me in English, "you have Cherokee blood. You understand the old ways. This one," he nodded toward Randy, "has shown proper respect for our hunting grounds. We offer him the chance to join our eternal hunt." "He has a family," I said, surprised that my voice was steady. "A life in the modern world." "What life?" the leader asked. "Hunting for sport? Taking more than needed? Your modern world has forgotten the sacred balance. We maintain it as we always have." Randy was getting lighter in my arms. I could feel him slipping away, becoming more like them and less like himself. "Please," I said, "let him go." The leader studied me for a long moment. "You know the old ways, daughter. You could join us willingly. Help us protect what remains of Cherokee sacred ground from those who would destroy it." For just a second, I felt the pull of his offer, to hunt these mountains forever, to be part of something eternal and meaningful. But then I thought about my work, my life, my responsibility to protect both the living and the dead. "I'll make you a deal," I said. "Give me 3 days. Let me prove that some people in the modern world still remember how to hunt with respect. If I can complete a traditional Cherokee hunt, the old way, with proper ceremonies, will you release him?" The other hunters murmured among themselves in Cherokee. The leader held up his hand for silence. 3 days, he agreed. Complete the ceremony of first hunt as it was done in the old times. If you succeed, this one goes free. If you fail, he smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. You both join us. The hunting party faded away like morning mist, taking the oppressive weight in the air with them. Randy collapsed completely, unconscious but breathing. He felt solid again, real again. "Patty," Joseph said quietly, "do you have any idea what you just agreed to?" I looked up at the ridge where the hunting party had disappeared. "I'm about to find out." Getting Randy down the mountain took most of the day. He kept fading in and out of consciousness, and when he was awake, he'd forget things. First, it was small stuff, what he'd had for breakfast, the name of his hunting dog. But by the time we reached the parking area, he couldn't remember his children's names. Joseph drove Randy to the hospital in Maryville while I stayed behind to radio for backup. I needed help understanding what I'd gotten myself into, and I needed it fast. The ceremony of first hunt wasn't something you could just look up in a book. It was old knowledge, passed down through families, and most of that knowledge had been lost when the Cherokee were forced west. I had 2 days left to figure out something that might not even be possible anymore. I called my supervisor, Bill Henderson, and tried to explain the situation without sounding completely crazy. "So you're telling me we've got illegal hunters on Cherokee sacred grounds, and they're... what exactly?" "I'm not sure, Bill, but you're affecting people. Randy Morrison is in the hospital with some kind of memory loss, and I think others might be at risk." "What do you need?" "Time to handle this properly. And maybe Dr. Sarah Running Bear from the Cherokee Nation Cultural Center. If anyone knows about the old hunting ceremonies, it'd be her." Bill was quiet for a moment. "Patty, you've been a good ranger for 13 years. If you say this is serious, I believe you. I'll make the calls." Dr. Running Bear arrived that evening, along with Joseph and 3 other Cherokee cultural officers. We met at the ranger station in Tellico Plains to plan our next move. The ceremony of first hunt, Dr. Running Bear explained, was how young Cherokee men proved they were ready to become hunters. It involved 3 parts: the spiritual preparation, the hunt itself, and the offering to the spirits. "What did the spiritual preparation involve?" I asked. "Fasting, purification rituals, and learning the proper songs and prayers. The hunter had to understand that taking an animal's life was sacred, not just killing for sport." Joseph spread a map on the table. The actual hunt had to take place in the traditional hunting grounds, using traditional weapons and methods. No guns, no modern equipment. And the offering? The first kill had to be presented to the spirits with proper ceremony. Every part of the animal had to be used or given back to the earth. Nothing could be wasted. I stared at the map. We were talking about completing a ceremony that most Cherokee hadn't performed in over a century, using knowledge that might not even exist anymore. "There's something else," Dr. Running Bear said quietly. "According to the stories my grandmother told me, the Ridge Runners weren't just any Cherokee hunters. They were the last of the hunting medicine men, the ones who could speak to animal spirits directly. What happy end to them." In 1838, when the soldiers came to force the Cherokee west, the Ridge Runners refused to go. They performed a final ceremony asking the mountain spirits to let them stay and protect the sacred hunting grounds forever. Joseph looked up from the map. "You're saying they succeeded?" "I'm saying that if these spirits you encountered are who I think they are, they've been guarding Cherokee sacred sites for almost 150 years. They're not going to give up easily." That night, I started the spiritual preparation. Dr. Running Bear guided me through the purification rituals while Joseph helped me learn the hunting songs. I hadn't eaten anything since morning, and my head felt light and strange. Around midnight, we heard the hunting songs again, drifting down from the ridges. But this time they sounded different, sadder, more mournful. "They're singing for the dead," Dr. Running Bear whispered, "for all the Cherokee who were forced to leave these mountains." The next morning, Joseph and I hiked back up to Haw Knob Ridge. I carried only traditional weapons, a wooden bow Dr. Running Bear had brought from North Carolina, along with handmade arrows tipped with flint points. The ridge felt different now, more alive but also more dangerous. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound made me jump. We found the hunting party waiting for us in the same clearing where Tom Fletcher had discovered the dead deer. They were more solid now, less translucent. The leader rode forward as we approached. "Daughter of the people," he said, "you have prepared yourself in the old way. We are impressed." "I've come to complete the ceremony of first hunt," I said. "The ceremony requires a successful hunt. You must track and kill your prey using only traditional methods, showing proper respect for the animal's spirit." He gestured toward the forest. "Your prey awaits." That's when I noticed the tracks. Deer tracks, but bigger than any deer I'd ever seen. They led from the clearing into the thick forest below the ridge. "What am I hunting?" I asked. The leader smiled. "The great white hart, the sacred deer of Cherokee legend. It has been waiting for a worthy hunter for many years." Joseph grabbed my arm. "Patty, the great white hart isn't just any deer. According to legend, it's the spirit guardian of all deer. If I kill it, I prove that modern people can still honor the old ways," I finished. "And if I fail?" "If you fail," the leader said, "you and your friend join our eternal hunt. The Ridge Runners welcome all who show proper respect for Cherokee tradition." I looked at Joseph. His face was pale, but he nodded. We'd come too far to back down now. The hunt began. The great white hart's tracks led us deeper into the forest than I'd ever been. These weren't regular game trails. They followed paths that seemed to exist between the trees, winding through spaces that shouldn't have been there. Joseph stayed close behind me, watching for signs of the hunting party. I could feel them following us, patient and silent, waiting to see if I was worthy. The tracks led to a hidden valley I'd never seen before, even though I'd been patrolling these mountains for 13 years. Ancient Cherokee settlement sites dotted the valley floor, stone foundations and fire rings that looked like they'd been abandoned for centuries. And there, in the center of the valley, stood the great white hart. It was magnificent. Pure white fur that seemed to glow in the afternoon sunlight, antlers that spread wider than any deer I'd ever seen. When it turned to look at me, its eyes held intelligence that was almost human. I nocked an arrow and drew the bowstring back. The hart stood perfectly still, as if it was waiting for me to make my choice. "Remember," Joseph whispered behind me, "this isn't just about killing. It's about understanding." I held the bow steady, aimed at the heart's heart. But something stopped me from releasing the R-suit. On. In the heart's eyes, I saw something that made me lower my weapon. Understanding. The great white heart wasn't my prey. It was my test. I can't, I said, letting the bowstring relax. This isn't a hunt. This is murder. The heart nodded once, as if approving my decision, then bounded away into the forest with impossible grace. That's when I realized my mistake. The hunting party materialized around us, no longer translucent. They were completely solid now, and they looked angry. You have failed the test, daughter, the leader said. You had the chance to complete the ceremony, and you chose weakness. I chose wisdom, I said. The great white heart is the spirit guardian of all deer. Killing it would have been the opposite of Cherokee tradition. You know nothing of Cherokee tradition, one of the other hunters shouted. We are the keepers of the old ways. But the leader held up his hand. He was studying me with those ancient, intelligent eyes. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is more than one way to complete the ceremony. The leader dismounted and walked toward me. Up close, I could see the terrible sadness in his eyes, the weight of carrying grief for almost 150 years. Tell me, daughter of the people, what do you know of the true Cherokee way? I know that Cherokee hunters never took more than they needed. I know they thanked the spirits for every life taken, and they used every part of the animal so nothing was wasted. And what do you see when you look at your modern world? I thought about the hunters I'd encountered over the years. Most were good people, but there were always some who hunted for trophies, who left meat to rot, who saw animals as things to kill rather than spirits to honor. I see people who've forgotten, I admitted. We tried to teach them, the leader continued. For 150 years, we've tried to show them the proper way, but they do not listen. They see us as ghosts, as superstition. So we began taking those who showed respect, hoping to preserve the old ways. By kidnapping people and stealing their lives. By offering them something eternal, purpose, the chance to protect sacred ground forever. Joseph stepped forward. But that's not the Cherokee way either. Cherokee tradition honors life, not death. The ancestors were supposed to help the living, not recruit them. The leader's face darkened. Do not speak to me of Cherokee tradition, young man. I lived it. I died for it. And that's the problem, I said, finally understanding. You died. You're holding on to something that's supposed to change and grow. Cherokee tradition isn't supposed to be frozen in time. The other hunters began to circle us, their eyes glowing with an inner fire. I could feel their anger building like a storm. The ceremony isn't about killing the great white heart, I continued. It's about understanding your place in the world. Cherokee hunters learned to take only what they needed and give back more than they took. But you've been taking people's lives and giving nothing back to the world of the living. We protect the sacred grounds, the leader shouted. From who? From people like Randy Morrison, who hunts respectfully and follows the rules? From Tom Fletcher, who's been coming to these mountains for 30 years and never broken a law? The hunting party began to fade and solidify rapidly, like they were losing control of their ability to stay in our world. You want to preserve Cherokee tradition? I said. Then help me teach it. Don't steal people away from their families. Show them the right way to hunt, the right way to honor the animals they take. It is too late, the leader said. The sacred sites will be destroyed. The mountains will be stripped bare. It is better to preserve what we can in the spirit world than lose everything in yours. That's when Joseph spoke up. What if we could guarantee protection for the sacred sites? Legal protection, not just spiritual. Your laws mean nothing to us. They might if you gave them a chance to work. Joseph pulled out a folder he'd been carrying. Dr. Running Bear and I have been working with the state on this for months. We're proposing to expand the Cherokee National Forest to include all the sacred hunting grounds. No development, no commercial hunting, complete protection. The leader took the folder with hands that flickered between solid and translucent. You would do this? We're Cherokee too, Joseph said. Different times, but the same people. We want to protect these mountains as much as you do. And if your laws fail, if the sacred sites are threatened again? I looked around at the hunting party, seeing them clearly for the first time. They weren't monsters or demons. They were Cherokee men who had loved these mountains so much they'd chosen death over exile. Their methods were wrong, but their hearts were in the right place. Then you could manifest again, I said. Legally, as cultural consultants helping to protect Cherokee heritage sites. Help us teach people the right way to interact with sacred ground. The leader was quiet for a long time, reading through Joseph's proposal. Around us, the other hunters waited for his decision. There is one more test, he said finally. If you truly understand Cherokee tradition, you will know what it is. I thought about everything I'd learned, everything my great-grandmother had taught me about the old ways. Cherokee tradition wasn't just about hunting or ceremonies, it was about responsibility. The real ceremony isn't about proving I can kill, I said. It's about proving I can protect. Cherokee hunters were the guardians of the balance between humans and animals. That's what I'm supposed to become. The leader nodded slowly. And what would you protect? These mountains, the sacred sites, the animals that live here, but also the people who come here seeking connection with something larger than themselves. Cherokee tradition says we're all connected. Animals, spirits, humans. My job is to help people remember that. The hunting part. I began to glow with a soft, warm light. The anger was fading from their faces, replaced by something that looked almost like hope. Randy Morrison, I continued. He needs to be made whole again, his memories restored, his life given back to him. And in return? In return, he becomes one of the first to learn the proper way to hunt Cherokee sacred ground. He teaches others. The old ways survive by growing, not by staying frozen. The leader dismounted and walked to where Joseph and I stood. He reached out and touched my forehead with fingers that felt like warm sunlight. Daughter of the people, he said, you have passed the true test. Not the test of killing, but the test of understanding. You will be the bridge between the spirit world and the world of the living. The last thing I remember clearly was a sensation of falling upward, like being pulled into the sky by invisible hands. When I woke up, I was lying in the valley beside Joseph, and the sun was setting. We found Randy at the hospital, fully recovered. His memories had returned completely, along with something extra, a deep understanding of what it meant to hunt respectfully. He couldn't explain how he knew the Cherokee hunting songs, but he hummed them softly as we talked. I remember everything, he told us. Both worlds, the offer they made, and the choice you made for all of us. The official report listed Randy's condition as exposure and temporary amnesia brought on by dehydration. Tom Fletcher's sightings were attributed to morning mist and the way light plays tricks in mountain valleys. The arrows found with the dead deer were donated to the Cherokee Nation Cultural Center as unprovenanced artifacts of unknown origin. But the real work was just beginning. Joseph's proposal to expand Cherokee National Forest protection was approved 6 months later. The sacred hunting grounds on Haw Knob Ridge were designated as culturally significant sites, protected from development and commercial hunting forever. I started leading Cherokee cultural education programs for hunters. Randy Morrison was my first student, then Tom Fletcher, then dozens of others. We taught the old songs, the proper ceremonies, the way to hunt with respect rather than just for sport. And sometimes, on clear mornings when the mist rises from the valleys, hunters report seeing Cherokee warriors on the ridges. But these aren't frightening encounters. The spirits offer guidance, teaching hunters to read animal signs, to understand when to take a shot and when to let an animal pass. The ridge runners are still here, but they're teachers now instead of kidnappers. I stayed on as a ranger, but my job changed. I became the official liaison between the Cherokee Nation and the National Forest Service, helping to develop policies that honored both modern conservation needs and ancient Cherokee wisdom. My great-grandmother's stories don't seem like just stories anymore. I can feel the spirits in these mountains, the weight of history and the presence of those who came before. But instead of being trapped by the past, they're helping to build a better future. Randy Morrison brings his son hunting now. Before they take a shot, they sing one of the old Cherokee songs, asking permission from the deer spirits. Tom Fletcher started a hunter's education program that teaches Cherokee hunting traditions alongside modern safety protocols. The mountains feel different now, more alive, but also more peaceful. The balance between the spirit world and the living world has been restored, at least in this small corner of Tennessee. Sometimes I dream about the hunting party. In my dreams, they're not riding through morning mist anymore. They're sitting around fires with modern hunters, teaching them the old ways, sharing stories that bridge the gap between ancient tradition and contemporary life. The Ridge Runners found what they were really looking for, not eternal preservation of the past, but the living continuation of Cherokee wisdom in the present. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the ridge at sunset, I can hear them singing. Not the mournful songs of the dead, but the joyful songs of the living, celebrating the successful hunt for understanding that connects all generations of Cherokee people to these sacred mountains. The wild hunt continues, but now it's a hunt for wisdom instead of spirits, for balance instead of control. And everyone who learns to hunt with respect becomes part of it, carrying Cherokee tradition forward into whatever future awaits these ancient mountains. In the end, that's what the ceremony of first hunt was always supposed to teach. Not how to kill, but how to live in harmony with the spirits of the land and the needs of all living things. The Ridge Runners are at peace now, and so am I.